To welcome everybody and thank Natasha for hosting this, and I just wanted to let everybody know that we are going to have we have made some donations for the presenters and for Natasha in their name to NCWIT, which is the National Council of Women in Technology. It's something I am incredibly passionate about. It goes along with diversity and inclusion, and so we thought that was a good way to participate in it, right? And then the other thing I just wanted to tell everybody is that I am going to be wrapping up at the end of the day, and one of the things I always think about when I come to a conference like this is to have, if you can take 3 things away that you can go back to the office with, then it's been a successful day. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to give you my 3, but hopefully people will think of their own as well. And with that, I just wanted to introduce Natasha Stow, and I also wanted to give you this as a gift.
Thank you. Well, very sweet. Thank you, Faith. As Faith said, my name is Natasha Stow, and I oversee our America's Campus Recruiting efforts at EY, and wanted to formally welcome you to our Hoboken office. This is one of several locations, but this is actually one of several offices around the world that we've differentially invested in from a training and meeting space standpoint. So these are actually state-of-the-art facilities that are actually designed as part of our workplace of the future, and thinking about how people work, how folks engage, our training and development of our talent, which is obviously extremely important to EY. So welcome. I do have a few logistics because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't share a couple of logistics. So we are in here for the day with Stephen, Faith, and the team. And then we'll have food and snacks and everything just right out in the foyer. Ladies and men's room is out the door to the right on either side of the water fountains. Let's see, I have my other logistics. We have actually the floor, so if you go to the right or left and go around in a circle, there's plenty of seating for lunch, tables, and there's beautiful views of the city and the Hudson River. So we're not just in this spot. You can go to other parts of the 8th floor. If you do go into the elevator bank, you need someone from EY and an EY badge. So please come and find me, and we've got a few other folks from EY if you need to get to another floor. We do have a coffee shop at on the 6th floor, because I know Gen Z loves their custom curated coffees designed for you. And here you will get just a cup of coffee. But if you need a curated custom coffee made to your liking or some snacks, you can find the coffee shop down on the 6th floor. So just let any of us know if you need anything there. And then just a few comments on our topic today. When Stephen had reached out and asked us to consider hosting, I said, first and foremost, we're happy to welcome, colleagues, friends. We are all in this journey together. And while many of us have been driving really comprehensive diversity and inclusiveness strategies, it's not easy. There's a tremendous amount of challenge, and we're moving the needle, but it's gradual. What I do love is that, again, we're all in it together, and I also appreciate that we're really expanding really what diversity and inclusiveness means, right? And how we think about attracting such different talent, right? Whether it's neurodiversity, the LGBT community, it's really expanded. And personally, Faith, similar to your passions, I love what many of us are doing to attract, engage, and promote women so that they are really moving up the ladder at the same rate as our male colleagues. So I have a tremendous amount of passion around that. So thrilled to welcome all of you. Look forward to just a wonderful day together, lots of chatting and networking and challenging one another, and some really good dialogue. And thank you for this and for the donation. That means personally a lot to me and obviously to EY. So thank you all, and welcome. Anything you need, please just come and find me or any of the team from EY. And Faith or Stephen, shall I turn it back to you? Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. And so Natasha has a Starbucks card so she can get her personally curated cup of coffee. So the first lie of the day is it's not just Gen Z that likes their curated coffees. There may be a Gen Xer up the front that also does. So yes, thank you so much to our hosts, Ernst Young, for this, for opening up their space. One of our very first events was, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. At the time, Dan Black was kind of in Natasha's role, and he welcomed us into the Times Square space. It was a great day. You can still see videos. I like to think of myself as looking more like I did then than now, but that's another story for another day. The catering also, the coffee, the snacks, the lunch, that's courtesy of our folks from Ernst Young. So if you love it, tell them, and if you don't, it's from one of their competitors. Alio, where's Ankit? There he is, back there. So Alio is the sponsor of the live stream. You can watch it when you get back to the office. So Ernst Young has provided us with notepads and pens. Take notes if you want. Actually, you should. But if your colleagues want to watch, right now, or start it delayed later today, or watch it 3 days or 3 months from now, you can do it. It's on our YouTube channel. And there's a link to it on the slides, and you'll see the link multiple times during the day. Peter Clayton, who's the guy with the headphones on, is doing his best Mickey Mouse impersonation, and Jolie Kinga over here are the videographers for the day. There'll be an opportunity during the breaks at lunchtime if anybody wants to sort of grab them and do like a little 3-minute or 5-minute kind of video. This is what our organization does, and this is how we're working to promote diversity and inclusion. Talk to them because that would be an easy way to get some good PR. You don't have to hire a camera crew. We've already done that. Actually, Alio has already done that. Thanks, Ankit. Actually, I think Ankit's going to be doing a talk a little bit about sort of how Alio helps its clients with some of their diversity and inclusion efforts. The 4 requests for the day. For those of you who are active on social media, for those of you who have not yet done so, just put your phones to silence. It's the days where we ask people to turn off their phones or pagers, thankfully, are long gone. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, use the hashtag CR Bootcamp. In our Twitter feed, that'll be curated. The format of the day, we're going to have 3 presentations, each of which will be 20 minutes, sort of like a bit of a TED Talk kind of format. And then the person who does the presentation becomes a moderator, and we'll have 4 panelists up here. 1, 2, 3, 4 chairs. That makes sense. And then so the moderator will then ask the panelists some questions to sort of dig in a little bit deeper on their presentation. What's going to get really interesting is when you start to make interruptions. And you stick up your hand and it's like, I hear what you're saying, that's not the way that we do it at our organization, or hey, we did that in a different way, I disagree, I agree, whatever. But there are, I think, about 125 people who bought tickets for the event. We've probably got about 115 of you so far in the room, and I bet you 115 of you, all of you, are experts in at least several areas that we're going to be talking about today. So share. During those panel conversations, it will be really, really interesting if the people up at the front of the room are sort of become the attendees, and the real conversation is going to happen out here. Faith is one of the things that she's going to be doing today. I think she mentioned, I encourage everybody to do the same thing. If you can walk out of the event today with 3 actionable items, then I think that the day is a success. Whenever we go to conferences, and we go to more than our fair share, whether it's a 1-day or a 3-day event, we try to come back to the office with 3 items that we're going to put into action. Not just things that are interesting, but things that we're going to go to a boss about, a coworker about, whatever, and try to put that into place. We do try to be green. So when you leave, if you just want to like drop your lanyards, and then we will recycle those. So I'm just going to kick off with a very short overview to help ensure that we're all sort of on the same page about what we're going to be talking about today, because diversity and inclusion means different things to different people. I'm not going to try to force my opinion on yours. That would be pretty inconsistent with diversity and inclusion. We all have different definitions. We all think about it differently. Every organization thinks about it and acts differently, and it can change month to month or year to year. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. There are some sort of broad strokes that I think that some people will talk about when in terms of what's the difference, what is diversity versus what is inclusion. And what it kind of boils down to from what I've heard from most people on that side of the podium that know a lot more than me is that diversity kind of boils down to the what. What is your gender? What is your race? Do you have Asperger syndrome, et cetera. And inclusion is more about what the organization does. It's sort of the how do we work together? How do we collaborate? How do we make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be part of that decision making? SHRM has a couple of definitions, bless their hearts, and they're longer than I want to read. But they're here on the slides. They're good. I'm not being critical, but if SHRM didn't have a couple of good definitions, that would be a problem. They should. I can be a pretty visual person. I think this is a good representation. The fact that you have a whole bunch of people who are diverse in one way or another, if they're not working together, that's not inclusive. And so, you can have, one of our customers years ago had a pretty sales-heavy organization. I think it was an insurance agency. And every single person that worked there came out of the same fraternity. Well, guess what? They were all male, pretty much by definition. And that fraternity was pretty much all white. And they wondered why they didn't have any women or African Americans or even from a different school. I mean, they all went, their names were probably all, Bubba or whatever. It was like everybody was kind of the same. And talking to them about inclusion was premature because they weren't yet diverse. And so until they had some people in their workforce who weren't essentially carbon copies of each other, it was a little bit too early. Fortunately, the people that we were working with, they recognized they had a problem. And just like in any good 12-step program, that's the first thing you need to understand. This is another slide that I really, really like. I've actually shown this to people in my family who have somewhat different views than I do about this. They're more on the equality slide. And I think that the equity slide really helps to portray it. And my vertically challenged wife sees herself over on the right, and I see myself more on the left. Sorry, Faith. I was saying at the beginning of this that years ago, 7-8 years ago, when we had one of our first events at EY's office in Times Square, one of the things that Dan Black said to me then was he was explaining why diversity and inclusion is so important to EY. And in addition to it just being the right thing to do, he made the point that it's also the smart thing to do. And I don't know if he used those words, but he was talking about study after study after study show that a more diverse and inclusive the workforce, the more productive is that workforce. And I thought that was an incredibly smart way of communicating the value to the C-suite. We're going to have a presentation today about how the CIA has promoted its diversity inclusion efforts and got buy-in from the C-suite. And if an organization like the CIA can do that, then just about anybody in corporate America can do that. If you've got the data, if you've got the studies to show it, then that's going to help you sell that to your leaders. So I've talked long enough. We are really honored today to introduce our keynote speaker. Ken, you want to stand up and we'll bring you up here. So Ken Boyer, when I went to Natasha and talked to some other folks at Ernst Young about potentially having this event here, I don't remember if it was Natasha or somebody else on your team, but they said, probably Natasha. Okay, so if you don't have his autograph yet, it kind of came across that way. It was sort of like, oh, wow, if we can get Ken to do this, he would be so perfect. Would that be good? I'm like, yeah, that would be good. So Ken's going to talk to us specifically about Ernst Young and the work that they've done. And then the microphone is yours, sir, and along with the clicker.
Thank you. Round of applause, Stephen. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Faith as well. The first thing I would say, I appreciate the intro, is to lower your expectations about my comments. Please do that immediately. But again, welcome to our office here. A little bit about me, and I've got a few comments around the firm and our D&I journey, and I will focus a little bit on bias and have the panelists come up to talk about and dig a little bit deeper. I actually just celebrated my 29th year with the firm, believe it or not. People are like, you must be crazy. 29 years in a variety of roles, and I grew up right across the pond. By that I mean the Hudson River. I grew up in New York City and started with the firm in the audit practice, did some work in our consulting practice for a number of years before taking on this role where I essentially lead all of our D&I efforts, recruiting efforts for the firm, and work very closely with Natasha and a number of other folks. I've got folks on my team here as well. But really, I think about every single day, how do I drive the strategy for the Americas to make EY a pretty diverse place? I think, Stephen, your definition around the broadness of diversity, clearly what we're focused on. Inclusion, would agree. The piece I would add to that, though, and something as a firm that we talk about, is we also need to have an inclusive leader, right? So you could have diversity in your organization. That's terrific. You can figure out how you're going to use them. But the reality is your manager, your leader of that team needs to be an inclusive leader. Because you could have diversity, don't have the right environment, and don't have the right leader, and frankly, you lose all the potential power of diversity. So I would say, as you think about where you are in your respective journeys, if you have diversity, if you're still trying to get it, is your environment inclusive? But are the leaders and the managers and the folks that they're going to work with every single day, are they really an inclusive leader? So when I go back, and this is way before I was involved in it, but in the early 90s, that's when EY began our journey around diversity. Back then, the words were very different. We had what was called the Office of Minority Recruiting. Full stop. That was it, right? And so when I think about those days, again, I think I was in audit or something back then, but the only thing we would focus on is how do we go out and recruit more Black and Latino professionals into the firm. That was it. Obviously, it's evolved. The definition has clearly evolved over the years, and certainly the firm's focus, which has been a great thing. Just to give you a quick stat on some numbers, I'll look this up. When we go to campus and hire folks back then, about 10% of our hires, minority hires. 10% were minority hires. This past year, as a firm will hire over 6,000 people in full-time, about almost 9,500 full-time and intern combined. We do this annually, by the way. So about 9,400 in rough numbers. 40% of our full-time hires are minorities. 40%, about half are women, right? So we've made some good progress, but I would tell you, for those of you who are just starting this journey, I know there's a number of firms who've been on this journey for a while. An early mistake that we made, though, when it was just this Office of Minority Recruiting was we went and we hired wonderfully talented minorities, but we didn't look at the firm's environment. And so the assumption was, let's go out and hire all this different talent, bring them to the firm, and everything will take care of itself. I would tell you that's not the case. And so if you're just starting this journey and you're going out to hire folks who are diverse, that's wonderful. But I would ask you to think about, what's your environment like today? Are you ready to receive people that have different perspectives, points of view? And are you ready for that within your organization? I would tell you most are not. Most companies are not. And if I'm always brutally honest, because I actually consult with a number of our clients on this topic as well. They want to learn from us, we want to learn from them. And when I go in and ask questions about their strategy or their focus, I'll walk away from some of these client meetings and say they're not really committed to this thing called diversity. Let's just be honest. Some organizations, frankly, just want to check the box. And I'm not saying we at EY are perfect in this, because we're not. We're learning every single day. But the one thing I can be really clear about is we're incredibly committed to this. Incredibly committed. So if you're a practitioner, if you're in the space working, you should think about, is your organization really committed here? And if you are sitting in a seat and call yourself a practitioner and really care about this issue, I'd ask, what are you doing in this space to make a difference? I'm a firm believer in, when you have a seat at the table, whatever seat that may be, don't just sit there, do something. And if you talk to any of my team, my folks here, in this space, in this role, I'm constantly doing something. I actually call myself a healthy agitator. I'm a healthy agitator when it comes to D&I. I think all of you need to figure out, what role are you going to play? How will you facilitate change within your respective organizations, firms, and companies? Because this work, as Natasha mentioned, is incredibly hard. I have diversity fatigue, even I get it. But I am committed to the cause, because here's why. So I mentioned I'm with the firm 29 years. I started in the audit practice in New York. I show up my first day of training, actually a start class about this size, 120, 130 people. I walk into the room, and this is just one element of diversity. There's only a handful of people of color in that audit start class of 130 back then. So of course I do the thing. I walk in the room, I look around, I did an intern with the firm. I look around, I'm like, man, there's not a lot of people that look like me here. And by that I mean tall and good looking. What were you thinking? See, well, let's talk about you for a second. But there weren't a lot of people that looked like me in the room, but that made me feel a certain kind of way. And then frankly, if I had a lot more time, I could tell you a lot more of my story. My first couple of years of the firm were really rough as a result. Because there's things like imposter syndrome and all that stuff that we go through if you're just different anywhere you are. Makes you react different, make you come to the workplace in a different way. And in a nutshell, I would tell you I lost my identity in my first couple of years at the firm. Man, I wish I had more time, but I won't take, I know. But I lost my identity, but the good news, I found it, and I had great mentors, coaches to say, hey, Ken, we hired you to be who you are. Don't try to be like the white partner you striving to be like. I'm just going to keep it 100 so the young people know what that means. I mean, I'm going to keep it real and authentic for the more mature people. I don't know why I point to you guys, but I'm just going to say, I just want to keep it 100. But it's been an incredible journey, but I'm passionate about it because I know how I felt my first couple of years at the firm and the impact that had on things like my performance, my confidence, and really reflecting on, did I make the right decision to work at the firm? The good news for me, the answer is absolutely yes. I've been blessed with an incredible career, but those first couple of years are rough. My goal is, how do I ensure that our folks we're hiring, all of our people, don't have to be like me when I first started? So that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I do. With our young people on campus, I spend a lot of time on campus. Quick comment about campuses. The campus environments now are really, really stressful. And specifically around hate crimes, way up. That's just true, not just campus, by the way. In the last couple of weeks, you Google, you look up the stuff that's happening on these campuses. Personally, that's concerning, because all of us are recruiting these kids. We want them to have jobs as well, but we also want them to come to our environment, when we call it having a global mindset, right? The ability to work across cultures, have cultural dexterity, however you want to position it. But on these college campuses where theoretically they should be learning and growing, there are some real issues on campuses. So if you have an ability to affect change on a campus, one of the things I love to do, I go to a lot of our major campuses, we recruit a lot of people, and I have meetings. I call them inclusiveness recruiting meetings, visits. And I'll talk to the dean or the university president or the provost and said, help me understand your strategy as it relates to diversifying your business school. Because I look at their numbers, I'm an audit guy, so I look at their numbers in advance, and usually the numbers aren't great in certain pockets. And I'll say, I looked at your numbers, help me understand, what are you doing to change that? Diversity is important to EY. You're a great source of talent for us, but frankly, we need more diversity in your business school or the School of Engineering. Those discussions are incredible. But also I walk away with that saying, some of these universities aren't really committed to this. What they do is they know a guy like me is coming, and I'll sit down with the dean, and the dean gives me a wonderful brochure of a few people of color and some women and some like stuff. And they're like, see, we're great. I'm like, really? I have a few questions for you. And so what happens is I'll walk away and I'll debrief with the team, and they'll say, Ken, what do you think? I'm like, man, they're really committed. They're investing, they got people, the dean's behind it, the president's behind it, or I'll say they just gave me the glossy brochure tour. I've been glossy brochured. That happens. That's my term. I've been glossy brochured. So that's the backdrop as to the journey. So as a firm, again, we're learning every single day. This is hard work, like hard work. And you've got to be committed to it. So let me stop there. I want to cover a couple of tactical things. And we talked about, what do you see, by the way, when you look at that picture? Call it out. What do you see? Some duck and bunny. How can that be possible? Who saw a duck? Who saw a bunny? Wow. How is that possible? It's all about your frame of reference, your perspective. There's actually a duck and a bunny in there. Some of you are still like, I only see one, but there's actually two. The bill's on the upper left, and then the bunny's more facing to the right. I did this in an audience, and someone said, I see a pigeon. I said, you should go work at one of our competitors. No, I'm only kidding. There's a number of you here. You guys all do great work. Thank you. So anyway, it's really about your frame of reference. Bias, and I won't spend a lot of time. I know you guys are very familiar with this term. But that's one definition of what this thing called bias is like. So I'll push through that, and we'll talk about that later with the panel because they've got some great thoughts on it. Really, biases are just shortcuts, right? It's the way you make decisions really quickly. And I'm going to cover a little bit about how bias impacts us in recruiting from my perspective. Frame of reference. So when I put up the duck and picture and all that, you yelled out different things, but the reality is there are factors that influence the way you see the world and the way the world sees you. Trust me. And generally speaking, what happens on the biological front are things that you're born with. You know, how old, sexual orientation, skin color, personality. And when people walk into a room, or when I walk up here, the first thing you see is like my features. Oh, he looks African American, he's tall, looks like he's 90, like those kind of things. Those are the first things that you notice about an individual. It happens to all of you. We kind of size you up. And then in the middle, social and cultural are kind of things you learn along the way based on your environment. So where you grew up, if you grew up in the Midwest, if you grew up in California, right, that shapes the way you see the world, your frame of reference. And then finally, at an individual level, that's just your own personal journey in life. So let me give you a couple of examples. People see you first based on the biological features. So I walk in the room, I stand up here, you make some quick assessments about me, just based on my appearance only. You don't know me, but you just bias. You go right to this guy's whatever he is, a gal's, whatever she is. And then you start to make assumptions about me. Don't even know it. You're all nice people, but the reality is you're making assumptions. This is where the bias starts to kick in. Should I be fearful of this guy? Who is he? And I can tell you, unfortunately, so many stories of how, in particular, my skin color and race has impacted the way people receive me. It happens. It's just something I've dealt with my entire life. Whether it's being followed in the stores, walking on an elevator and the woman clutches her purse tighter. And I'm like, I can write a check for everything you got and then some. But whatever, that doesn't matter. Told you I'm going to keep it 100. So, that's bad. Keep me honest on time. Let me know. Thank you. So, but that affects the way I see the world and the way the world sees me based on skin color as an example. If you go in the middle on the social and cultural, right, so things you learn from your environment, that's the way I see the world. The example I would give you is a generational frame of reference for me. And this is going back a few years, but I'd go around to a lot of our offices and I'd see our staff folks working. And they'd have these things called earbuds in their ear, headphones on. And my initial reaction, this is a generational frame of reference, is, why are they wearing those things? Those are horrible. That was my generational frame of reference. But here's why my reaction was like that back then. It's changed. Because when I was a young staff person sitting in the audit room, I couldn't wait for the partner to come in or the manager to come in so I can eavesdrop on their conversation. I don't recommend you eavesdrop, but the point is I would learn a lot about what was happening on that client through listening to their conversations. Now, if I had my Sony Walkman headphones on, and some of you know what those are, those who don't Google Sony Walkman headphones, if I had my Sony Walkman in my ears and had music playing, there's no way I could hear what was happening. And in fact, take it further, perhaps the partner would think, that person's not really interested in being here. Why are they tuning us out? So my reaction was, you're tuning me out or tuning the world out, and all you care about is the music or what you're listening to. So I talked to people, our young people. I said, well, why do you wear those? Because this is the other important part of frame of reference is you got to ask questions, because your bias will allow you to jump to conclusions, but you have to ask questions. So I ask questions. Why do you wear that? Well, Ken, we grew up this way. We always had headphones. I studied with them. I can multitask. I don't agree with that, by the way. So I felt better. Still don't agree, but I'm like, okay, I understand. You grew up like that. I did not. So let me get out of the way. Right? So that's a frame of reference, a bias, a conclusion I made. Finally, on the individual level, this is about your experience. So I've got a 15-year-old daughter, but my wife and I, we were married for a long time before we had Kelsey. And so we travel, we'd be on airplanes, and then you see this, and don't judge me for this. You see this young couple walking down the aisle with a small baby. You're like, please don't sit next to me. No. I love babies, I love kids. So anyway, so I'm like, all right, we got to get noise-canceling headphones. How ironic is that? So now we have stuff on. But it wasn't until we had Kelsey, until we were that young couple, well, we were a little bit older, but to that couple walking down. And I'm like, there are people right now saying, please don't sit next to me. Please don't sit next to me. But that, frankly, helped change my frame of reference. So now if I'm on an airplane, I see a young couple or a couple with a kid, I'm like, you can sit next to me. But I got headphones and noise canceling, and I download all my music, so I can't really hear. Factors that influence your frame of reference, right? Each of you, based on the frame of reference that you have and you bring, now all of a sudden the bias kicks in. Assumptions are made. And in the world of D&I, this is when we get in trouble. When you just look at someone's physical appearance and all of a sudden make assumptions, for some people it could be deadly. It could be deadly. And so for all of us who are in this space, the folks at your organizations, the question is, and it's important to pause before you jump to conclusions and make assumptions about someone or people in general. And I think so much of this work is about educating and raising awareness. And so this is just one, I have a ton of examples, but this is just one example of frame of reference and the impact on diversity and how bias creeps in. And this happens, you could give examples around performance reviews, who gets certain assignments in your organization. If students are in the classroom, if you're the only woman in an engineering class, can you imagine how that feels? If you're the only person of color in a chemical engineering major at school, and that's my nephew, so we're having a lot of hard conversations. First time he's ever experienced racism, I won't tell you the school. He's like, I'm the only person in here, and when we have to serve and sit on project teams, I'm always the last chosen, if I get chosen at all. So that's why I'm passionate about this stuff. I know we are better when we have diversity. And I think each of you have to think about what does this mean to you personally and to your organization? And what will you do to affect change? Frankly, we need everybody in the boat to make change. Last piece I'll mention, because I think I've got to get our panel up here, right? The last piece I'll mention is in our early days of our journey, here's the biggest mistake that we made, in my opinion. We excluded the white guys. In fact, at that time, diversity was about everything except for the white guys. And we realized we need the white guys in the boat too. Oh, by the way, white guys are diverse in their right as well. I got a number of friends who are white, and they're not all the same, white guys in particular. So I think depending on where you are in your journey, I would say this is where the inclusion piece really matters. Like it's about everybody. Gotta get Steven in the boat. You're diverse in your own way. He would sink the boat, he says. But we'll learn a different way to paddle. Learn a different way to keep you afloat and keep all of us afloat, right? So that's about being inclusive, right? So I think ultimately that's what you have to get down to. So I'm going to stop. I don't know if I have time for questions or anything, and I had another example, but I think you guys got the point. But I will, super quick, because I think, so staying along with the frame of reference, right? And this is specific to recruiting. The ladder of inference, we call this. You start from the bottom. And this is, imagine you being in an interview with someone, with Jane. So you're sitting across from Jane, and Jane asks literally one question. And so you take that observable data, the one question she asks, or that one data point, because that's the data you select or you hear, and you automatically start to add meaning and make assumptions. You're like, she should speak up more. I'm interviewing her. Why does she only have one question? Then you start to make assumptions and draw conclusions. She's not going to be assertive enough to speak up in the firm. She won't be able to lead a team. You know what? We shouldn't even extend Jane an offer. Done. Jane's done. Right there. Now, here's how I think you should think about frame of reference and shifting that. You could shift it this way. Different interviewer. Jane's across the table. Jane asks a question. I select data. Look at meanings. Man, that was a very insightful observation and question that Jane asked me. She was really listening to me. She really did her research. It was an incredible question. Man, she has a good understanding of the firm, and she really is a great listener. I'm drawing conclusion. I'm like, she's going to make a great addition to the team. One of our best candidates, Jane's going to get an offer. This happens all the time. If you're interviewing, important that you work with your folks who are part of the process to make sure they understand what bias means, unconscious bias, and they don't let that creep into the recruitment process. And I didn't even talk about AI and all the stuff we're doing now and how there's a lot of bias built in there potentially. But for each of you, because we do a lot of training for our recruiters around bias, even for our people in the firm. I was in Orlando last week at an event. We always celebrate promotions. So our new managers, we had like 4,000 new managers in Orlando from the Americas, celebrating their promotion. We call it a milestone event. So I always speak down there, and we always bring in a professor to come and talk about bias to all 4,000 managers. Dr. Benazzi from Harvard, she's fantastic. There's a woman here in Columbia we use as well, Dr. Kathy Phillips. But the point is, how do you help people see the world differently, to challenge their frame of reference? And this is where I think we get in trouble. So that's what we need to do, in my opinion, more of. But anyway, let me pause there. And first I'll see if there's any questions, and then we'll bring up the panel. Okay, so was that helpful, by the way? Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? We can wait to the panel. Oh, yes, go ahead. We'll take a quick one.
So how are you doing, sir?
Great, thank you.
How are you doing, sir? My name is Juan Camacho. I actually am a recent hire to EY myself. So
Welcome.
pleasure to be able to.
So be careful what you ask.
Hey, absolutely. But like you said, I'm going to keep it 100 as well. So my question to you is, I'm pretty new here in my journey as a college recruiter. I'm a campus recruiter myself. I go out there, right, connect with the folks directly, one-on-one and so forth and so on. I'm trying to still maybe identify a fine balance between, we want to keep D&I top of mind as we go through our campus recruiting efforts. At the same time, we want to make sure we have an equitable, unbiased playing field as it pertains to folks going through that recruitment process. In your opinion, how do we identify that fine balance as campus recruiters?
So as far as creating equity across the recruitment process, tell me more.
Correct, like creating that equity in the processes. We connect with folks and we bring folks through our, say for example, our pipeline, but at the same time make sure that we, at some way, shape, or form, have D&I top of mind as we go through that process.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I know you just started and we should chat more, but you know, my goal personally in working with Natasha as well and make sure we embed D&I in all that we do in recruiting, including at the campus level, just across experience as well. I think this is why I'm trying to push universities, right? So the reality is if we go to a campus, XYZ campus, and there's enough diversity, right? When we do events and receptions and work with organizations, there should be enough diversity that we see it and we can go. I told someone last week, or yesterday, I was at another event, I said, my goal would be in 5 or 10 years, we don't have to do special events. There's just so much diversity in and of itself that it could just be part of the normal process. The reality is it's not there at most schools today, so we have to differentially invest in order to create the pull-through. But it should be in everything that you do, and you'll hopefully continue to learn that, and that's how we should approach our events and the activities that we do on campus. We've got a number of D&I leads from the firm who are here who could help you, but we should talk more. But it's a great question. It continues to be a challenge for us. We do a lot of pipeline building, high school programs. There's so much I didn't cover and have time. But as a firm, we do a lot at the high school level and, frankly, the middle school level to build diverse pipeline. And we'll all benefit. All the firms here, we hope, will benefit from that. Many organizations do the same thing. As Natasha mentioned, we're in this together. So the pipeline building that we collectively do, we'll all benefit. We'll get our slice of the pie. But this is it's a long-term investment and has been for many, many years. Great question. There was one more hand, and Stephen's going to give me the hook.
That's Lois. One more question, and we'll bring the panel up. Like a certain dictator in Italy in the 30s and 40s, I'm going to keep the trains running on time.
Okay. I still say benevolent dictator. First of all, I loved your talk. Thank you so much. Really helpful. I have a question for you. Looking back, hindsight, of course, 2020. It was when you're in terminally other land, right? When a culture is turning into diversity and you're the odd man on campus or whatever. Looking back, what was the internal shift you made to weather the storm, and what were the external structures within the culture that helped meet you there, and how can that be replicated in other cultures?
Yeah, great question. For me, it was a couple of things. I've always been a very competitive person. So I was kind of determined. I'm like, once I had someone talk to me, this is the other key. There was someone who, he was a partner at the time, showed interest and cared about me. And essentially he said to me, "You okay? Something seems wrong. Let's talk." And that gave me permission to say, this is not going great. And that allowed me to really share. And so that was the start of it. And then essentially he gave me permission. He said, "Ken, we hired you to be who you are." This is the way we before we talked about bringing your authentic self and all that stuff. He said, "We hired you to be who you are, number one. Number two, you deserve to be in this firm. So be who you are and know that you deserve to be here." Right? And those words, him giving me permission at that level, was a game changer. And then after that, I just had to get after it. And I did. But fortunately, I had him. His name's Alan Boston. But fortunately, I had him at the time. So you need people, mentors. You need folks to look out for you, like for your young people, your diverse people, whoever they are. You need folks to care about you. We talk about belonging. I'm sure many of you do too, right? We talk about this notion, this iteration of diversity, but it's about belonging. To the extent you can get people in your organization to feel like they belong, they contribute in a different way, they're very productive, and they add to the bottom line in a very different manner. But a lot of cultures are not prepared for that. And I will tell you, a lot of people leave organizations, including EY, because they don't feel like they belong at times. And you've got to figure that out. But anyway, great question. Man, I got so much more to say, but so does this panel. Please come up, my great panel. Give them a round of applause. We'll introduce themselves. But thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Grab a seat wherever you'd like.
Yeah, so while the panel's getting seated, just as a side note, we don't need to go back, but a couple slides back where you had the slide up about different diversity, and it was like sort of what you're born with was the first circle. I noticed that one of those was personality, which gave me a great sense of comfort because I am the way I am, not because I choose to be that way. It's a disability. I mean, it's just, that's kind of, so in that way I'm diverse. Dawn is right here, Dawn Carter. Recently joined Uber. Dawn was our host a couple of years ago when she was at Intuit. So we're super thrilled that she flew all the way across the country, got in way too late last night. Did you get a glass of wine? I did. You did, okay. So she's good then. Then we got Pam Baker. Pam is the CEO of Journeus, and she's also a member of our content expert panel. We have something like 12, 15 HR practitioners, people, experts in the industry, who we basically ping maybe once a month, once every couple of months with a question and we have a question from a job seeker and what kind of advice should you give, would you give them, that kind of thing. So she's very gracious with her time and participates that way. Kim Jonz reached out to me a little over a year ago before our last event at Google and basically said, hey, great speakers, great panels, not a single woman of color. Thank you. Right? Right? We all need to be reminded. And I mean, I think from when I was putting it together, and I was the one who put together the agenda, I actually thought it was a very diverse panel, and it wasn't enough. And that's partly where today's event came from. Because of you being, Ken, what did you say? Aggressive?
Healthy agitator.
Healthy agitator. There you go.
Aggressive? Where'd you get aggressive from?
Yes, sorry, that's me. Yes, exactly. And then Joe Week, who is a good friend of ours, taught us Faith and me, how to get front row seats at a Harry Connick Jr. concert. And where then I was like the guy with like 10,000 women. And that was an interesting experience. So I guess, again, I was diverse. And Joe's actually going to be doing double duty today. Our next presenter, Penelope Trunk, is unable to be here for personal reasons, but Joe is going to be jumping in, doing a presentation. If she stumbles at all in her words on this panel or during a presentation, forgive her. She was up at 3:30 this morning working on her presentation. So I will let you take it away. Thank you much.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that.
And anybody has questions, remember, that's when it gets really interesting. And we have a microphone. We'll run around with the microphone.
Thank you. You can have a seat now. Thank you. So, appreciate you. Let's just start, do quick intros. Tell us more about this panel. Like, you're going to be in for a treat here. So the format is we'll do some intros. I'll ask them their perspective on bias, unconscious bias. I'll ask a couple follow-up questions. And then, frankly, we're going to turn it over to you. So you're right. You should run the panel. Like, there's a lot on your mind. You're here. We want to hear your questions, and we're just going to go with it. Does that work? All right, perfect. Joe, why don't you start here, and we'll work our way down. Mike's on the table there.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to turn it on. Pretty much a bellower.
Yep.
There we go. Good morning. Is this better? Okay, great. Well, I am really excited that there are this many people who care about these issues. You know, we all think, oh, I don't have any bias. You know, I'm just a clean slate. And then you pick Jif over Skippy. Hello. We've got biases. We just don't know about them. So sometimes it takes other people to hold a mirror up and you're thinking, whoa, that was in there. I had no idea, right? So I think that this is really great. We need to continually challenge ourselves first and foremost, look in the mirror, but we can't do that by ourselves. We need other people's perspectives in order to be able to understand where we're missing the mark. So I'm really excited to be able to participate here today.
Good morning. Kimberly Jonz. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Kelton Legend. We are a talent acquisition consulting organization, bi-coastal, Columbus, Ohio, and LA. It's warmer in LA right now than it is in Columbus. Interesting fact about me that has helped shape my perspective about diversity. I am the youngest of 11. I have 9 sisters and 1 brother. And so for me, growing up, being able to play in every color wig, makeup, choir robe, stilettos, a little bit of everything. So when I got involved in diversity and understood it, and I'm like, this is like growing up in my house. We all had to be a Jones, but we could still all be who we were. And so I've been able to carry that forward in what I started out originally as a talent acquisition professional, but being able to now as a consultant really help my client base across a number of industries understand what I call the power of collective imagination. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Good morning. I'm Pam Baker, the CEO of Journeys, and our focus is on making career launches better. And many of the young adults that we'll work with are from diverse backgrounds, whether socioeconomic or gender or racial or perspective. And what I'm particularly proud of is that through our work together that they recognize that what each of them brings to the world really matters with the tools to make the most of it. So glad to be here.
I know. Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Carter, and I've been in the university and diversity and inclusion space for about 20 years. So prior to joining Uber, I spent my last year being the head of D&I for global talent acquisition at Intuit, and that was a really cool, unique journey. I look at this really in a way. I start just from my family. My dad's first generation, the first Carter to be born in this country, the first Carter to ever finish high school in 250 years of Carters. My mom is second generation, so we're definitely not from this country. We either came through Ellis Island or Angels Island, pick an island. But what that always taught us was, if I look back at my life, there was always inclusion from the very beginning. It didn't matter who you were or what you were always at our table. And I probably just how I was brought up, and it goes back to like who your bias is or who your things are. We all have bias. My bias, as long as like Alabama doesn't win the football game, I'm a happy camper. That's my bias, sorry. Or Seattle Seahawks wins, I'm a happy camper. But we all have it, and I'm excited for this conversation because we had this on our call, which is, it's evolved eventually, and you always think you can fix it, and it will never be fixed. I don't want people to think they're going to walk out of their company door and say they've fixed bias. You will fix a portion of it, and then you'll go, crap. Now we have something else. And that's the fun part of our jobs in talent acquisition, is that we get to uncover, and now we have data scientists, now we have things that we just didn't have 5 years ago to solve the easier parts of bias, to then figure out what are the harder parts of bias to uncover.
Great. Thank you all. Joe, we're going to go back to you. Perspective, views on bias, unconscious bias. What does that mean to you when you hear those terms? You said Skippy and Jiff. But expand a little bit more. Let me give you the mic there.
So when you think about biases, there are the ones that you know about, especially like your preferences for peanut butter. You just know that that's your bias, right? It's the things that you don't realize that you're biased against, and it's really interesting how we grow up in certain environments, in certain families, and that shapes how we view the world. Several years ago, I'm thinking maybe a decade at least, somebody had made a joke, and it became a common joke that like elderly Asian women are bad drivers. And I laughed at that. Why? Because my mom was the epitome of that stereotype. She was Asian, an elderly Asian woman who was the worst driver I had ever known. So I thought that that was funny. So that's going back years, right? And then flash forward to now, where I've gotten to go through an evolution and understand how stereotypes, even if that's your only knowledge, in fact, all my friends' mothers were the same way. We all used to joke about it all the time, how horrible drivers they were. But understanding now how unbelievably racist that stereotype was. But that was my experience. So amazing how we can transform. And they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can see I've got gray hair. But obviously, we are still learning. If we care, we will keep learning. We will keep having other people influence us so that we can be better.
Thank you. Kim, same question. Views on bias, unconscious bias. What does that mean to you?
So a couple things. I mentioned this on the call. The term unconscious bias, I feel like it's being used as a buzzword and a Band-Aid. And so there are a lot of things that happen very overtly, and the company line is, we're going to be offering everyone unconscious bias training. If you obviously discriminated against someone, that is not an unconscious bias, that is conscious bias, and people need to be held accountable for it. And so the unconscious things, I love that you started with the slides talking about what our brain does. We tend to gravitate towards things that we are familiar with or we feel safe about. The same way that I wouldn't walk to a stove and see that it's on and put my hand on it. My brain knows not to do that. And so there are things that we have either decided that are bad or have had experiences with that are bad. And that comes into play when companies aren't just making decisions about who to hire, but when they are setting strategy. And so when you think about conscious versus unconscious, when companies say, we're going to attend the career fairs at the good schools, that is not unconscious bias, that is conscious bias, because the CEO, the C-suite, someone who has the most money in their budget is funding your college efforts. And so I graduated from there and I'm great, so that school must be great. Maybe you're not great. Maybe you've been accommodated because you've been in company with your alumni. I like telling the truth, sorry. Oh, no, actually,
Oh, that's what
I
you
am
want,
not
the truth.
sorry for telling the truth.
Keep it 100.
Yes, so this concept of unconscious bias, I appreciate the psychology of making people more aware. What I don't want to happen, though, is people not also hold people accountable for conscious bias. You cannot send someone to a diversity training when sometimes what they need is diversity therapy. And so being able to introduce unconscious bias, not just in practice, but in strategy, but balance it out with also holding people accountable through about conscious bias, those two are equally important.
Great point. Just quickly, and then we'll continue to work down. It'd be unfair for me to mention the school, but a few weeks ago, and this is your point exactly, there was a tenured business school faculty member who made some horrendous, racist, homophobic comments. It could be that school. And the university said, hey, we don't agree with it, but it's a First Amendment issue, and that's fine. I totally disagree with that position. I do think at some point, where are your values and what do you stand for as an organization? And sometimes you got to deal with the consequences. Yeah, you're going to get a lawsuit, you're going to go to court, but candidly, where do you draw the line? So I'm with you. And that was purely conscious, very conscious in the comments. You didn't even hide behind it. The university said, yeah, we don't agree, but we can't do anything. That's B and the other thing. Yeah. Yes.
The big B.
Big B.
A big fat B. So Natasha kicked off this morning saying we're really expanding the view of what we mean by diversity and inclusion. And some of the work that we do actually is with teachers and looking at the bias in terms of communication style, learning style, and what that means for all of the kids in their classroom. And so your ladder earlier, Ken, of that candidate asked a great question, a data-driven question. That means they're going to be a good candidate. I like facts and figures, and that means they're smart, they're qualified, they'll be successful. And some of what we find is that based on the different communication, what we refer to as channels that teachers prefer, that affects how students learn. So this starts early on in terms of what's perceived as good, the right way to communicate, to learn, to get motivated, and then it continues. And so when we can help teachers understand how can they communicate in a way that connects to all of the students in their classroom, and how can we work with leaders to communicate with everyone on their team that allows them to get the most out of the strengths of each person on their team, whether that's perspective or many of the other ways that we traditionally think about diversity. Boy, you have a much more powerful team that way.
Yeah, great point. One follow-up. So my daughter, she's 15 now. My wife and I are very conscious. We sent her to an all-girls school. And we're very worried about the bias in the classroom, specifically around math and science, right? Because it's found that teachers call on the boys. And we didn't want that. So we took that variable off. We sent her to an all-girls school. Guess what? She's thriving in STEM. Like, she's killing it. So the bias does exist in front of the classroom. That could be detrimental for some students.
It can, and equally, it can also be about, hey, I need a little bit of fun and playful contact in my day. I need a little bit of competition in my day. And how can teachers integrate that also in terms of how the teaching goes, and how can leaders integrate that in terms of how they're engaging their team?
Great, thank you.
I'll probably take it a little different slant. One is, as organizations, we're always asked to remove bias in the process. How many of us have been asked to remove bias in our recruiting process? Raise your hand. All right. If you're not raising your hand, you should be. So at my last company, we thought we took it really seriously, and we did some pretty radical things in our interview process of engineers. We actually removed our employees from the front part of the process because we thought there was bias, school bias, GPA bias, people look like me bias, pick a bias. And we found we had some. We increased women, underrepresented minorities, schools. We went from 20% schools that were not our core schools to 40% by removing them. At the end of the day, we still felt we had bias, but we didn't know what it was. And that's where we had a really great partner who was doing some work with the Chain Zuckerberg Foundation, and we figured out we had curriculum bias, and we didn't own it. So the schools own it. And what we discovered was that we're sitting here with these great steering committees of technical advisors to help create our technical, challenges online, but not all curriculum is created equal. So the class that you take at Howard your junior year, someone takes at Stanford their freshman year or their sophomore year. And so we were starting to experiment, and I didn't get to do it before we left, but we were starting to experiment with what if we could figure out how to identify school curriculum to map to our interview questions, so that we knew if somebody went to a smaller school or went to a community college first and transferred, again, they're not going to take classes till their second year, their junior year, compared to their first part of their junior year. How can we map what their knowledge should be to the questions? And so to me, that's around really digging deep into what that bias is and what the conscious bias is, which is we didn't own it, but we still knew it existed, to how do you start still removing that and get really creative with that. We didn't get to finish the work before I left. I know they're still kind of trying to think about it, but you sometimes can't stop where you think you've removed it. You have to take a step back and say, why aren't these students still making it through the process? And what does that look like?
That's great. Hopefully someone will continue to pick that up. I love that concept of really doing that research. Hopefully they will. Questions from the audience? We can keep going, but questions, anything in your mind, in the back there. Start in the front, then we'll go to the back. How's that?
Hi, Don. This is Rachel. I'm from a company called TriNet here locally. And actually, just what you said spurred a thought. So I think we often hear from managers, why wouldn't they want to go to the school that's teaching the curriculum sooner, that's going to give those students a leg up? How do you influence that? What is your perspective there?
Gen Z has totally changed the concept of that. And so there's a lot of great articles. Ping me afterwards. I can share some with you. This Generation Z is really choosing school very differently. They're still getting into Stanford and MIT and they're still getting into, Boston College. But they go to SUNY Stony Brook because they don't have to pay out-of-state tuition. So Gen Z, their parents lost 40% of their wealth in 2008, 2009. So for them, they will not graduate with debt the way millennials did. They also know they have access to the Googles and the Facebooks and the EYs, and they don't have to go to that school to find those roles. And so there's just a very huge mind shift, which I love, of how students are choosing schools. What we have to do is how do you find the students? And I can share some stuff afterwards.
That is great. Yeah, through technology, right, we can reach so many more students today than we ever had. The other thing we're doing now is we're starting to go to community colleges and really talking about the profession at large and figuring out how do we pull folks through. There's a question in the back, I think.
Yeah, hi, my name is Caroline. I'm from Synopsys, a large tech company. So for us, a big component of our diversity recruiting is females because of that kind of stigma, women in STEM. What are your thoughts on if there's mandates with managers to, you need to include females in your interviews? If you're interviewing 5 people for the job, make sure at least one of them is female. What are your thoughts on when there's kind of mandates? Because then isn't there a bias against the very well-qualified white male?
Thoughts, panel? I got some thoughts.
I know. I was just going to say, I know you. I want you. Because we had this on we had a very lively call.
Let's go, Kim. What do you got, Kim?
This concept of pipeline, what's in your pipeline? And so I'm going to combine this with what you talked about. There has been, at least to a certain extent, originally a fact, but it became a myth that there's not enough diverse talent in the pipeline. And we are so far into these discussions that companies who really were seeking a particular demographic, whether or not it be a skill set or another demographic, I recall, you're left-handed? Yes. Yes. How many other people in the room are left-handed? Awesome. So if you know that your goal is to create a more diverse environment, and you are genuinely going out and you're not finding it, you have an obligation to create it. And so those of us who have been in TA for a long time, you always talk about this make buy. If I don't have it in my organization, I have to go out and make it. You can't make something out of something that's not there. So if your organization is looking for women and you're recruiting in places where there don't appear to be qualified women or female candidates, you have an obligation to help make those women. And so this goes to your concept about curriculum, where companies were looking for talent, like, oh, their curriculum doesn't teach this at all or teaches it late. Nothing stops you from then from teaching it, either teaching it in your organization and teaching it online, donating dollars to those organizations to help teaching it, being on their advisory board, creating the curriculum. And so I agree with you. You can create bias or exclusion of people who were qualified because now you're talking about quotas. I understand math very well, but you never have to create a disadvantage of one group to provide an advantage to another. And so if you're finding that you don't have those female candidates through your regular recruiting efforts, it doesn't mean disadvantage the male students who are qualified. It means do something different and a lot more deliberate in your curriculum, in that development of that curriculum, so that curriculum is then producing female students, so you don't have to stack the deck against anyone else for someone to have an opportunity to be considered.
Other thoughts, panelists?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I would also add, who's on the panel? How are you asking the questions? And where are you recruiting to find your pool? Because it's not just about we're not finding enough women and let's get more women into the panel. It's about what's that whole process look like? And then once they arrive here, how are folks then integrating into the culture? How are we truly making the most of them so that when folks show up for the panel, for the interview conversation, that they're seeing folks like them, and as they look online for what's the ratio from all the different kind of ethnicity and diversity groups, then are there folks like me who are thriving and rising through the organization?
There's an organization called Grace Hopper that many of you are familiar with. You should look into Grace. You should show up and have presence there. I'll take a slightly different view than my panel. I do think if you want to create the change, you're going to have to do something different. So whether it's going to different sources, that'd be the first thing I do. But I also think you have to differentially invest. So you can call it a goal, a quota, whatever it may be. The fact of the matter is, in your organization, you probably have revenue goals or utilization goals. You set targets there too. And so our offer is, what's so different about this? Got one here, you as well. I love these idea fragments. This is great questions. Perfect. Just give you food for thought. Guess what? If you disagree, that's perfect. That's what we want. If you agree, that's fine too.
Hi, my name is Courtney Jones. I lead university relations for Nielsen. To the point that you made about like the slate, one thing that I would caution you about that we kind of trapped ourselves in, we have diverse slate requirements. At least one female, at least one racial or ethnic diversity. What we found is, and there's research to support this, so I'll get your name and share it with you, don't just do one. Because statistically, you'll kill yourself. So we had a bunch of folks saying, well, we made the diverse slate requirement, we're still not getting diverse candidates. So we're like, well, we're not mandating diversity, but we want diverse slate compliance. Now we have two, and the way that it works out is you take bias out by having more than just one, if that makes sense.
It's an HBR article called Two in the Pool.
Yes.
That's what it is.
I was just going to say, yeah, two in the pool.
So
Great
I
point.
just wanted to learn from our mistakes.
That's great. We've got a question right here. Let me give you.
Hi, Janine Truitt, Chief Innovations Officer for Talent Think Innovations. Not so much a question, but just to kind of layer on some more advice. So I've worked for, not now, but for a really long time, I worked in federal contractor environments. And what I found to be helpful is you have to be willing to have really honest discussions with your hiring managers about what you expect without making it seem like it's a mandate. So when I worked for Brookhaven National Lab, for instance, we were beholden to an affirmative action plan. We were very much behind the 8 ball with things because of that one and done kind of mentality. One of the things that I used to share with my hiring managers was, hey, you know those initiatives that are so important to you, you know that science that you do that you get so excited about when you walk me around the laboratory, that's tied to a federal contract. And we don't get those federal contracts by having a bunch of people funnel in from the school that you have of choice. So here's the deal, work with me. If the person that you have is the best person for the job, we hire them. But I'm gonna need you to kind of mix it up. So, and it was from that lens because they didn't want to lose their money. It's like a help me, help you. You don't want to have to play that game in diversity at all, but sometimes that's kind of the conversation that you have to have for them to understand why it's important for them to incorporate other people in their slates.
I think to piggyback on that too is one of the things when we launched Data Scientist a few years ago, you know, it was all around, I still remember having a conversation with our chief data science officer, and he's like, I want to go to all the HBCUs and blah, blah. I'm like, they don't have graduate schools. Oh, I didn't know that. And then I pulled the data, and I'm like, you know, last year there was 22 African Americans who graduated with a PhD. 22 in this country. In this particular field you're looking for. Oh, okay. I'm thinking about this wrong. I'm like, yeah, so let's take a step back. If we look at more than just this particular degree of PhD, we can quadruple the number. And that's how we actually went from like 20% women to 55% women in our PhD class. Because we hired neuroscientists, we hired bioscientists, we really looked outside our like little guardrail of field. And so I think sometimes that's another thing for you to think about with your groups is like, it may be that you can only hire this type of major, but sometimes even looking outside that major or that field can get you just a broader pool of students.
Yep. Got a question here.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Mark Lloyd. I run University Recruiting for Tenable. I just had a question. It seems like when we're talking about pipelining and building the kind of a diverse talent pool, what challenges have you run across and maybe solved when it comes to looking at things past the biological, right? Past the things you can see, especially these days when, again, the term diversity is so broad and so encompassing of things you don't necessarily see when you're talking about neurodiversity, LGBTQ. What challenges have you seen there?
Well, let Joe, do you want to answer? I know you're going to cover some of this later, right?
Well, specifically in our neck of the woods, we kind of both work in the just outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And I would say that with the specific types of people that we need to recruit for the roles that we have had in that specific geolocation, it is very difficult to find, first of all, people who really want to work in the Washington, D.C. area. So we have a hard time attracting people there, even if we offer relocation benefits, because it's a very expensive place to live. And then secondly, I would say that, and I'm sure you've probably found this as well as you all are recruiting, that there isn't a wide berth of people outside of white males for the specific types of roles that y'all hire for in your company. So it's very difficult to go outside that. And I find that technology, we all say, oh, we're going to be replaced by robots. We're never going to be replaced by robots, but we can certainly leverage, the tech tools to be able to help us. I will just mention one. And by the way, if I ever mention a company, I have no ties to that company. I don't even let them buy me coffee because I want, anytime I speak about a referral, to be purely that, my opinion. So seekout.io is a great tool that I used where someone sat me down and said, okay, you want to find, these sorts of people, like whether it's, and they were all tech roles, right? So they narrowed it to within 25 miles of Columbia, Maryland. And 135 people came up because they put in different distinguishers. We actually did it two ways. One was because we wanted to see if there were any African American or Latino women that were available and in our area, and there were 135 that came up. Then we did a blind recruitment, into that system, where all of the names had been redacted, and so we were just simply looking at skills. And then we were able to sort of have that playing field that was a little bit more level. So I think that we can leverage technology to be able to assist us to either target or do this blindly. Either way, it's still going to help us to identify people that we might not have been able to identify just by sitting behind, that social media platform that we're all on. So.
I mean, that's still very biological, and I was more towards the things that you can't see.
Oh, like the diversity of thought sort of thing.
Well, diversity of neurodiversity, LGBTQ, veteran status, things that people might not put on their resume you can't tell by looking at.
Okay, so there's another organization, and I don't have the name, but I used it at the last DoD contractor that I worked in, and they will take your job description, and they actually are connected all over the entire nation with every single diverse group that exists. And so they have autism groups, they have, groups of people who were incarcerated, they have, people who are the African American, CPAs of the United States. There were all of these different groups so that you could have them send those out. They would actually identify, your company as wanting to reach those people, and then you would be able to draw in more people from groups that maybe you wouldn't have been able to reach just by.
I'm gonna so the Silicon Valley doesn't have a great reputation for women, African Americans, Latinx, and it just doesn't. It is hard for me to convince a mother from Atlanta to let her kid come work in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley, where I've worked before. It is not easy. And so you don't underestimate how much that can be a challenge. And that's why you see a lot of the Valley technology creating hubs outside of the big Seattle and San Francisco and Silicon Valley hubs, because talent wants to work for those organizations, and it doesn't matter if it's EY or anyone else. We have to figure out how to go to the talent, and don't underestimate that in itself can be a bias too. If your company, I worked at Amazon for 6 years, and we wanted all of our developers to be in Seattle, and we kept saying for years and years and years, holy crap, that is not going to work it's only going to work for so long, and now they're having to look outside. So it is hard, and I think one thing internally in your companies is, if you're struggling with stuff, is pull in your employee resource groups. They're the bomb. They're going to help you. They're going to look at your processes, give you feedback on your processes, look at your schools, help you out on schools. But if you, they're a great wealth to give you honest feedback into who you are as an organization.
So, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'll ask for just a couple final thoughts from each of you. The good news is we'll be around, so if you have specific questions you want to follow up on, I've got some thoughts for you. You should definitely come up and ask us. But just final thoughts, if we can work our way back, that you want to leave these guys with.
This is never going to be done. It's just the lens of what we talk about has changed in 20 years. And I also caution us that students don't want to be called neurodiverse. And they don't want special neurodiverse events. That's what we're hearing through focus groups. And so I think as an industry, we're going to have to really think hard about doing some of these events. We do women's events, we do this event. Students of Gen Z want niche events, but I think we have to rethink how we're talking about them to the students.
Thanks.
So my background was on the big company side. I was at J&J and Genentech for a number of years, and my experience was that the recruiting process can get stale. We can follow a similar process year after year, and then there are separate parts of the organization that are thinking about what are the skills and talents that we need moving forward, and sometimes those don't get linked up. And in a really tight job market, thinking differently about, So what are the ways that we find some of those skills and experiences differently? And it's not necessarily about Harvard, it could be SUNY Stony Brook. Thinking broadly about how do I pull folks in from different walks of life who bring some of these very skills that I'm looking for, and how do I create an organization that allows those to thrive and make the most of them, so that, again, folks see folks like them, whether that's biologically or with the experiences similar to them, thriving in the organization.
Thanks, Dawn. Kim?
I will say, as diversity advocates, as talent acquisition professionals, C-suite, we're all on this diversity journey. And what I would remind you is you also have students who are still on a diversity in life journey as well. And so a company that I worked for, we offered diversity. The company is called Meet on Common Ground. It's a video. It's kind of 6 vignettes. We offered it to students, and we had Vegas rules in the room because we wanted to have these open discussions. And about halfway through, one of the students raised his hand. He said, "Ms. Jones, I didn't meet a black person until I got to college." And I appreciated that he felt comfortable enough sharing that. But my question to him was, why was that such an epiphany for you? Because you knew black people existed. Did you have that same epiphany when you met someone Asian or someone in a wheelchair? And so my words to you is, as we're all going through this journey, keep in mind that you're meeting students who are also on a life and diversity journey. And so if you're recruiting students into an organization that values diversity and they have no value for it or no conscience about it, you have to meet them where they are. And if they're coming to your organization, you have to be prepared to do the work or make a decision that that person may not be right for your organization.
Thanks, Kim. Joe, final comments?
So how many here are responsible for the college recruitment at your orgs? Okay, so you know how we participate in the job fairs, and we have our booths, and that's what we do. It would be a great idea to contact the schools that you participate in, and again, take the advice of the panelists, go to different schools than just the ones that your C-suite went to, and find out all of the different groups that they have. They have so many diverse groups. Host refreshments for one of those groups, and then go in and say, so if, we would like for you to be invited to come and check out, our organization and our jobs, what would appeal to you? What language would draw you in on our job descriptions, and what would repel you? You will get a very, very honest response, and they can be your teachers and informers of how to shape where you go from here.
Thank you. My final comment is, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. So what are you going to do differently? Please join me in thanking the panel so much. You guys are terrific. Thank you.
I started Exemplary Consultants to help companies with anything that has to do with HR and talent acquisition. So what I do is help people to disrupt how they've been doing HR for the last 10 to 20 years. So if your firm is into hiring people with progressive leadership experience, who have degrees in HR, I'm not your gal. But if you want to kill your annual performance review and do agile performance methodology and things like that, then definitely, holler at me and I'll be happy to help. Also, if your recruiting team is just simply mostly doing stuff behind the desk, then also hit me up, because I can help your team think outside the box and find out how, if 72% of all roles industry-wide are filled by networking and referral, how much time should you be spending on LinkedIn? Oops, sorry, I said that name, but, so I'm happy to help. Okay, so Greta Bernburg. Ring a bell to anybody? Okay, so she made herself a meme of how dare you, but she also changed up how everybody started having attention now to climate change. And she has taken the world by storm. She's 16 years old, but here's what she had to do. She had to address something. She has a diagnosis that she received 4 years ago. You know what that is? It's Asperger syndrome. So what is Asperger? Well, first of all, it's named for a guy named Hans Asperger, who back in the 1940s found that there was a connection between people who had difficulties with verbal and nonverbal communication. And so I'm just going to read here. There's also a guy named Tony Atwood, who's a world authority on Asperger's, and he said that people diagnosed are usually renowned for being direct, speaking their mind, being honest, and being determined, and have a strong sense of social justice. And I will tell you that the people that I know who have Asperger's, they're all adults now, is very descriptive. I have a relative, that got that diagnosis when he was in his teens. His parents had taken him everywhere to try to find out what it was, because back in the 1990s, people didn't even really know about autism back then. And I just think, wow, in 20 years, look how far we've come. How many people here know somebody who has Asperger's, or knows that they have a kid who has Asperger's, or a neighbor who has Asperger's, or any autism spectrum disorder? Yep. So there's a lot of people now, it's just become a thing. In fact, they're all like, oh, it's because of red dye, it's because of all these things. But at the end of the day, we are learning how people function differently. You know how there are different learning styles? People who are auditory learners, they learn by hearing. The kinesthetic, people who learn by, hands-on, and the visual learners, people who really like looking at that blackboard. So it's the same way with how we're all wired differently. And so just because we're wired differently doesn't make us really different in terms of what we can bring to the table. So you know that Time Magazine decided to award Greta Thunberg with Time Magazine's Person of the Year. So how many would like to hire a person like that who makes Time Magazine Person of the Year? Would you like someone like that working in your organization? But how many are in organizations where you would probably have ruled her out for any number of reasons that you can't identify, but it's because you don't understand her. And what we don't understand, we're afraid of. It's just that way. I think about the parents of this particular relative. They just didn't have a clue. Once that diagnosis came in, well, then what do you do from there? Okay, so I want to talk about the Asperger's. Then I want to talk about the autism spectrum of disorders. And then I want to talk about it in terms of how does that affect us, overall with diversity and inclusion here for our hiring needs. So first of all, what is it? Well, back in 2013, they decided that there were many different parts of disorders that they've decided to lump under just simply autism spectrum disorders. And so it usually involves difficulty with social interactions. First and foremost, the social interactions are difficult because there are not social cues that have been processed. For example, one might give you intense eye contact and just laser focused, and you're all of a sudden feeling uncomfortable. And then there will be those that they're talking to you, but they're not giving you any eye contact. And so that doesn't mean that they're socially inept. They just communicate differently. And so the restricted interests, here's the thing that's really, really cool. So there's one guy that I know, he became like the person we always talk to about the weather. Why? Because that was the one subject he was absolutely the subject matter expert in. He knew everything about wind velocities, and he could predict what would happen in these tornadoes and storms because he understood the patterns, from years of having these kinds of disasters, and it was just extraordinary. So people that have that kind of narrow interest become like the SMEs. They have the deep and wide. The desire for sameness means that if there is a job that has to do with bookkeeping and numbers or data entry or stocking or coding or something that's going to be similar every single day, that it's going to be pretty much the same type of thing. There will be some variations, but it's the same type of thing, having repetitive tasks to do. That is where somebody with Asperger's would simply thrive. And you know what? They would take that job that you would have for them, and they'd get it on steroids. So this particular relative saw that the family kept throwing things into this pantry down in their basement, and within 10 minutes would have everything looking like a display shelf at Whole Foods. It was just extraordinary. That would, if I were to go down there and try to do that, it would have taken me an hour, right? But this particular individual, just had that ability to focus on that. So same thing with my friend's daughter. She works at a grocery store, and it's really the perfect job for her because she has the things that she does every day. She had to branch out where they put her in one department, then they had to try to slowly integrate her into another department, and a number of years later, she is thriving as their best employee because she's dependable. She brings her, focus and her strength, to the job every single day, and they absolutely love her there. So the strengths can include that remarkable focus and persistence. I hired a young man on a marketing campaign that I had to do where we had to distribute 3,000 jars of apple butter to these neighborhoods for a realtor. And he was meticulous about making sure that those labels that went on the tops of the jars, they were absolutely picture perfect, and he didn't stop, it's like he just kept on going until the job was done. At one point, it's like, you can go home now. I'm sure your family misses you, but that was where it wasn't done until he was done. So that attention to detail makes any person desirable. I mean, wouldn't we want to have someone who could have focus, who could have the ability to get things done and pays attention to those details? Have you ever read those resumes that say, oh, detail-oriented, right? And they have typos in their resume, and you're thinking, yeah, swipe left. So, okay, so then some of the challenges can include these things, and the reason why I think we need to look at this in the context of this day is that how are we designing the interview process to be inclusive of people, not just people with Asperger's, but people who may have sensitivities to lights and sounds and tastes? Are we having panel interviews for people who are like introverts, for example? Okay, I know this sounds crazy because I portray myself and I'm pretty extroverted in my portrayal here, but I definitely am tested out as being introverted because after something like this, I just want to curl up in a ball for the next day and not talk to anybody. So here's the thing. Panel interviews are no good for people who are introverted. Panel interviews are not good for people with autism spectrum disorders. It's just too much distraction. So how are we not just really trying to get more one-on-ones in more quiet locations and the ability to let people take time to answer? Because if you ask a question to someone who is introverted, they're going to sit and think a bit to try to respond because they've got several different things going on. So you need to just wait patiently and don't be doing this, And same thing with people who have Asperger's. Same thing with people who are autistic. They are noticing when you're looking up at the clock or you're kind of when your face kind of glazes over. So here's where your biases have to just be left at the door before you walk into that room. You have to really look at yourself and say, okay, I'm not comfortable with talking to this person because I didn't grow up talking to people who had these issues. So I don't know what to do. Well, that doesn't mean you don't get to learn now. We all need to really stretch ourselves and just get outside of our own boxes and our own comfort zones and learn what does it mean to relate to people. So don't raise your hand, but if you are here and your social group consists of people in your age group, people who have the same political persuasion, people who are in who have your same religious beliefs, people who are in your same ethnic groups, if those are your only people in your social circles, how are you going to grow? How are you going to change? How are you going to become tolerant of others and their differences? How are you going to become accepting of people's differences? And then how do you then transition to celebrating the differences that we all have? So I would challenge you to find a meetup group that does knitting if you're into gaming, or just something where you can actually find people who are different than you. Because you know what? The more you hang out with people who are different from you, you will learn how to be a way better recruiter. So I would say this last one, the anxiety and depression, raise your hand if you've never had an anxious thought or never had a depressing thought in your life. We've all been there. We've all walked, in that. Whether or not it was a diagnosis or not, we've all been there. So we should at least have that empathy in common. So even though that diagnosis is no longer being used, people still who are diagnosed with it strongly identify with the term. So it's unlike what we just heard that on neurodiverse, that people don't really like that. Well, people who had this sort of embrace that as, a definition of who they are. So one thing that I have found amongst the adult friends that I have that are with that diagnosis, they tend to overcome challenges and strengths. So if you were to just kind of Google it, like let's say you're going to set up an interview with Greta and you want to kind of learn about Asperger so that you can kind of get up to snuff and figure out what you can and can't do, you're going to read things that aren't true. There are, for example, there was the school of thought that if you were diagnosed as being bipolar, you will always be bipolar. And guess what? That isn't true. There are so many people who've learned to retrain their brains and they are no longer bipolar. So they're no longer on medications. Same thing with Asperger's. This particular person that I have been talking about, in his youth, would have to have, like if there were a meal, like if his mom had made him a meal and it had these 5 things that went with that meal had to have those same 5 things in that same order on the plate every single time or there was a meltdown. They had a really hard time being able to figure out what to do about that. And the psychiatrist who had diagnosed him said, that's the way he will always be. Well, that young man is now, much older and eats sushi and Chipotle and all of these other different things it was just like a mystery, a total mystery. And here's the other thing. I know that you've probably watched, I forget what the name of that program was on TV, but it featured some guy who had Asperger's. And I would say that a lot of how he presented in that particular show was fairly accurate. But the other thing, too, is that they don't get jokes. And I actually hit up my girlfriend last night and said, okay, your daughter, when she had been interviewing, what were some of the biggest drawbacks with the interviewers? And it's that she didn't understand joking. And they thought she was rude. And they didn't let her go to the next level. And so that's where, if you make a joke and somebody just has a flat affect and they're not laughing, they probably just didn't get your joke. Doesn't mean you're not funny. It just means they didn't get the joke. No harm, no foul. Move to the next thing. But don't judge them for the fact that they didn't get the joke. So this young man actually would be in social settings where people would tell jokes and just have like no reaction until one day I remembered we were all at this young man's house and his father told a joke, and a few seconds after everybody laughed, you could see a light bulb go off on his face, and he started laughing. And I thought, he just got that joke. And then, a few weeks later, met up with them again, and it's not only did this young man start getting jokes, actually at the same time that everybody got the joke, that person started being able to tell jokes years later. So never think that just because somebody presents a certain way, like when you're interviewing them, that they won't change and grow when they're in-house. They're not, don't treat people with rigid definitions because, if like maybe let's say 2 weeks ago, I didn't feel well and I was really depressed and you interviewed me on that day that I was really depressed, I would probably not have the energy that I have right now, even with coffee. I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to present with much energy. And then the thing about it is that you would form an opinion about me based on my behavior in that hour. Is that a way that we really want to consider people? How they behave in 1 hour on one day, whether they have Asperger's or autism or they're just you and me, right? Is that how we want to really be evaluated for our suitability for a role? I think we really need to think that out. So at the moment, 50,000 people per year are going to enter adulthood, with an autism spectrum disorder. So what does that mean to us who are recruiting, especially when it comes to college recruitment? I really feel like we need to be tapping into groups on college campuses because they do have groups. You know, the Autism Speaks is a really great organization, and they have organized groups on campus. So if we want to be able to learn from people with autism, that's who we want to learn from. If we want to recruit them, we need to ask them, this is our recruiting process. How is this inhibiting you from applying for a job? If we have you in for an interview, what are things that would really upset you if you came into this situation? And what are things that would make you feel more comfortable in a situation? So I think that the intel that we need to gather are from people to make sure that we are being inclusive in our entire hiring process. But primarily when it comes to those in-house interviews, I think that the most people that I have seen that actually are saying that they have these things that, okay, well, we have online, you know, where you can call this number and you can have, you know, you can do this talk to text thing where it can be filled out. It's like, it's great to have all that up front, but then I know this is one of the cringiest things I have ever read in my life, but there was a guy who showed up for a tech interview at this company, and it was in an older part of Oakland, I think it was, and he was in a wheelchair, and the people who had interviewed him and called him in had not known that information. The interview was on the second story of a walk-up. Do you know what those people decided to do? They came up with the brilliant idea that 4 of them would carry him in his wheelchair up to the second floor. Please don't let that happen in your orgs. I mean, that seriously was one of the sad, I actually teared up when I read that. I thought, I can't even. So make sure that you are doing everything that you can to make your environments in your places as inclusive. Think about all of the ways that people would need to access, be able to be comfortable, and to exit gracefully. Just make sure you're doing that for all people, but also specifically get the input of people whose senses might not be working in the same way that ours are. So just to recap about autism spectrum disorders, really it's just persistent deficits in social communication, social interaction across multiple contexts. So you think about like the software developer, you know, the person who codes in their parents' basement and they just knock it out of the ballpark, right? Well, they may not be the ones who are going to play well with others, but you give them that more isolated environment and let them do their thing, and they are going to produce every single time. You know, you make them come to sit in an open space and you want them to sit side by side, you know, at a table with other people. It's like, whatever it is that you think you're doing to build team cohesiveness needs to just go. You just need to start over and rethink what you're doing and say, why are we requiring this of all people? You know, everybody doesn't need to be sitting at some big open table, you know, with these ceilings that look like they're in a warehouse or a factory or something. Not everybody's going to thrive in an environment like that. And then the restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, leverage the hell out of that, because you'll be able to take people who have that focus, they have that drive. They've also found that most people have an above average IQ. These are really intelligent people. A lot of geniuses have this, and you probably don't even know that because they haven't self-disclosed. And that's another thing too. Don't come out and ask people if they have this. It's almost like, just don't. You know, it's like asking somebody, oh, are you pregnant? You know, to say, oh, so, you know, you see something, don't become their psychiatrist and diagnose them. It's like, no, we don't ask them. If they want to identify, that's one thing, but don't make people uncomfortable by asking them questions that would make them think that, oh, you think I have this. You know? And it's like, don't out them. You know, it's like, let them out themselves to you. So when we think about what makes a company diverse, my very dear friend, Torrin Ellis, is somebody who I call Mr. Diversity and Inclusion. I have the greatest respect for this individual. He has influenced the way that I think about everything in life, and he challenges me on a regular basis. So I told him that I just found out before getting on the train that I was going to come up and do this. So I said, what actually makes a company diverse? And he said, diversity is about any person who is underrepresented, you know, in the workforce. And I just thought that was really lovely, because it doesn't identify, you know, the socioeconomic aspects. It doesn't identify biology, but it really means have you had this, or has this person been in a situation where they're not being included? And I can tell you that just because someone didn't finish a degree does not make them unhireable. So even if you are doing college recruiting and you're reaching out to juniors or you're reaching out to people who are underclassmen or something, they may not finish, okay? Keep them in your pipeline, because if you engage with them and you really think that they would be great once they graduate, if they don't graduate, they may still be great. So I would like for you to consider all students, not just the ones who graduate, but all students altogether. So I think that inclusion is all about embracing belonging. And anybody that you come in contact that you're recruiting should feel like they could belong in your organization. You're not finding ways to exclude them. You're finding ways to rule them in. So I think we need to just retrain our brains, every day challenge ourselves about our biases. And I can tell you, when you look in the mirror, you're going to see a certain image. I can tell you that if my daughter looks at me, she's going to see something totally different. My neighbor's going to see something different. I need other people to tell me what I look like, because I can't assess myself. So get trusted people, the people that you know who are going to say, oh man, that shirt really looks bad on you. Get that person, to challenge you, because you want to be able to think outside the box. And then find new sources, for candidates. If you've been fishing in the same ponds, I'm sorry, time to change this up. There are so many different groups and so many different organizations that we can tap into. And I think that we can really up our game if we do that. So I have the amazing privilege of having just met last night the panelists that are going to be coming up now. And I will say that I've already learned from them just by looking at the questions that they've submitted. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm already going to learn a lot from these people. So if you could just join me in welcoming the next panel, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Here we go, excuse me. So instead of me yabbering about them, I just sort of sent them some questions that I wanted them to answer when they introduced themselves. And so, so Jonathan, if you want to go first, we'll just work our way from here on down. That would be awesome.
All right. Thank you. Really excited to be here today. My name is John Kestenbaum. I'm the co-founder, managing director of an organization called Talent Tech Labs. On your seats, you might see a little green playbook that we put together to kind of explain to you how to leverage technology to hire diverse talent. That's what we do. That's our expertise, is understanding how technology can make an impact on solving talent acquisition business problems. And we deliver that expertise through a membership.
Oh, wait, Jonathan, why do you love what you do?
Oh, man. So I love the people that I get to work with in talent acquisition. So everyone really cares about making a difference, helping people. So you generally are working with nice, thoughtful people. And personally, I'm passionate about how we can leverage technology to make our lives more efficient. So I get to do it every day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Janine Truitt, Chief Innovations Officer for Talent Think Innovations, LC. It's my own multidisciplinary consulting firm where I focus on workforce planning, digital transformation, wellness, tech advisory, just to name a few things. In the scope of all of those things, my focus really is on human transformation. So how do we meet the humans that we are every day? How do companies meet the humans that we are every day through the work that people choose to align themselves with? So through those modalities, that's where I work. For 15 years, I've been heavily involved in the disability community, being on different boards like the Viscardi Center, working with organizations like United Way, another organization called Free, just really trying to be an advocate and create pathways in the workplace for people that are differently abled in a lot of different ways, and trying to bridge that gap.
And Janine, what do you love about what you do?
What I love about what I do is that I was able to build something from the ground up. So I was an HR practitioner for many years. I got really tired of being beholden to a certain way of being an HR practitioner and feeling like I was constantly going against the grain in the organizations that I joined. And when I recognized, and to Ken's earlier point, had advocates that saw something in me that I thought I had to put off 20 plus years, because Talent Think wasn't going to happen until my husband retired, who's also exiting, but that's separate. So the idea that I'm able to really come up with fresh and innovative ideas and work with people that are ready to do this work and improve humanity, I think is my favorite part.
Not a problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Lois Barth, and I'm principal of LBCC, Lois Barth Coaching and Consulting. And lucky for me, I'm an ideation junkie. I feel like another day, another idea. And so I get to do a lot of different things. I'm a human development expert, motivational speaker, coach, and author of Courage to Sparkle. Because my motto is, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that bling. And I feel that way about human beings, right? That we all sparkle when we shine bright, when we share our gifts, and when we make a difference in the world. And that, to me, is what I love about diversity, that when we have a diverse culture of different sexual orientation, age, gender, body type, learning differences, that's when the culture becomes rich. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we spend, $2,500 for a studio that's the size of like an amoeba's shoebox, because every 5 blocks there's another language you hear in Manhattan, and it's the same thing in the work culture. So what I do is I bring in, I do motivational speaking a lot for women in male-dominated industries, which is about 98% of most industries, and I also do a lot of B2B coaching, executive, being brought into organizations to help with the mid and senior level executives. What are their vision, and how do we up-level the team, both in leadership and responsibility. And what do I love about my work is I've never had any children, none that I know of. And so I really feel like I'm a midwife for people's dreams, both B2B and B2C. Nothing makes me feel better than knowing that with my work as a team, with my clients, whether it's B2B, B2C, groups or individuals, that they are moving towards their goals and their visions. And they're not only making a difference in their life, because they're also making a difference in everyone else's and in the culture. So to me, it's like, I feel like if I won Powerball, I would still be doing what I'm doing, and I'd fire myself from the things I don't like doing. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Cassie Ward, and I am the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Phenom People. And my role is and our mission of our company is to find 1 billion people the right job, no matter what disability, what gender, race that the individual is. And what I love about my job is a little bit different than her. She has no children. I feel like I have 1 million children at my company, and I'm responsible for every single one of them. And I tackle all of the experiences throughout the talent life cycle. So that's candidate experience, recruiter experience, hiring manager experience, and then the last experience is the C-level experience. So anything that has to do with those experiences as they come in the door, or even before they get there, is really under my umbrella. And that's what I love about my job, making those unique. So I'm like the Starbucks barista, making sure that everyone is unique and different. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I think that some of these questions have really stimulated me. I have been anxiously awaiting to hear the answers. So Janine, if you could get us started with what do you think that neurodiversity and disability hiring continues to be a challenge for many employers?
If we start with neurodiversity, for instance, the process of cognition and the process of thinking is an internal sort of thing. It's not something that we can see, which is why it's been a problem for psychologists and psychiatrists for so many years. It's been this ongoing battle since I was in school for psychology as to whether, thinking is a thing, because we can't see it. It's not tangible, right? And then when I couple that with the years that I've worked with organizations really trying to move the needle ahead in terms of leveling the playing ground for differently able people, whether neurodiverse or not, the chief thing that I've heard through the years is it scares them. They don't really know what to do with a person that is visibly disabled or shows a behavior or a deficit that they're not used to. And why is that the case? Because everything we have, everything we know is geared towards a neurotypical spectrum, right? And who made that up anyhow, right? And so everything we do from there is going to be biased. It's going to be skewed because we're looking for a certain pedigree in every person that we meet, regardless of what we put in our job descriptions and our job postings. It's like we've created some sort of bionic human that we think is going to be good in a role. And far be it that we get somebody in a wheelchair, or far be it that we get somebody with Asperger's or a learning deficit, or somebody like myself who happens to be introverted. So I don't have Asperger's at all. I wouldn't consider myself a disabled person. There are some jokes that are just not funny to me. So if you said it to me in an interview, I'm probably not going to laugh because I'm also blunt, right? But I will turn your company out. I'd like to think I'm pretty smart, right? But I would have lost pretty early in the game just based on some really kind of neurotypical things. And so I think it continues to be a challenge because in a lot of ways we don't want to be challenged with something that's different. And this is just another peg along the diversity spectrum of yet another group of people that we've got to pander to. And why, you know? And so it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge. And it's one that I hope will open up the ground for us to really start looking at diversity from a human perspective, because we all are neurodiverse. Yes, right now, currently, the operational definition speaks to a specific group of deficits and things like that. But I guarantee you on any given day, I'm as bright as they can be and sometimes not that bright. And I'm sure you all can attest depending on those things. So the hope is to really level the playing ground so that it is less about being neurotypical and more about the diversity of thought.
Right. So then when we think about this, okay, well, where does it all start? It really doesn't start with us, the recruiters, does it? It really starts with the people who are managing it. Oh, the people who are managing recruitment. So Kay says, should talent advisors or recruiters who are at the forefront of hiring, should they have diversity discussions with hiring managers? Hello? What do you guys think? You guys are too quiet, so I wanted someone from the audience. I mean, we're all recruiters, right? And in the room, now we've got to go back and say, okay, recruiters, now you got to talk to your hiring managers about diversity, right? We've given them tactics along the way to work with our hiring managers. Here's something else. What do we think? Before I answer, I will share with you the EEOC statistics say that 74% of managers are white males, and then 74% in HR are women. So we're already at a negative bias there, I guess. But what do you think? Should we now have to talk with our hiring managers about diversity? Everyone thinks yes. I agree. I think we're at the forefront as recruiters, right? So when you think about how we can make a change, and we've talked about that a lot today, just being able to have these conversations openly with our hiring managers about their teams, because we know that the best relationships that are successful in your organizations are the ones where recruiter and hiring manager are really, connected well. 67% of Glassdoor reviews say that employees want to join a diverse organization, right? That's a big percentage. So we have to share these statistics with our hiring managers and make sure that they are aware of this and not take it as a disadvantage, but really start to change and make it more of an advantage. So.
Could I add to that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I've had this sad privilege of demoing, thousands of talent acquisition technology solutions, and kind of watching how organizations with really thoughtful, strategic approaches to diversity hiring leverage those tools. I watch everything fall short at the hiring manager. Always, every time. Doesn't matter what you do, it always falls short at the hiring manager. And you have to be really sensitive to how you solve that problem, because legally you can't incentivize them to hire diverse talent, right? And so we've seen some pretty interesting technology that that kind of tracks anonymously these different teams and how how they're hiring, if they're hiring diverse talent at the hiring manager level, so you can start to assess each individual team and how to solve those problems in those problem areas. But I think it always falls short on the hiring manager, and definitely need to step in.
So who here has a story that they want to share about something that is being successfully done in your company in terms of getting hiring managers on board?
Hi there, my name is Joe. I work for Deutsche Bank on the campus recruitment team. A successful strategy that we have appointed for getting hiring managers to think more about diversity is we approach it by division, and within each division we appoint senior leaders who act as diversity champions, who champion all forms of diversity and inclusion at multiple different perspectives and help influence the hiring managers.
So my question is, so you talk about on the the recruiting side and the hiring manager side. I'm curious as you think about what colleges are doing to prepare students to make the most of their own diversity and show up prepared to have an interesting conversation and engage in a way of, here's what I bring to the table. What are you seeing that's working on college campuses to allow students to make the most of what they're bringing?
Yeah, could you repeat the questions? Thanks.
How or what are colleges doing to prepare students to understand some of their differences and what that can mean in the workforce? And we talked a little bit earlier about veterans. We work with athletes. We talk about neurodiversity, and all of those, yes, are different, and they bring some unique strengths to the table. So I'm curious if folks are seeing some positive things that are happening on college campuses to prepare students to show up and talk about these things in a really positive way in terms of both understanding them and also knowing what they bring to an employer.
If not, I think that's a great business.
I think the university,
great business.
and I'd love to hear schools if anyone has them. I think where the universities, where the Office of Diversity has a close tie with the career centers, you'll start seeing successes, but they're very separate. Data does not flow easily between the two. And so I think if you put 25 career center directors up here, their frustration is they don't know the data to know the students to help support them in a way that makes sense to probably the student sometimes. But I know there's schools that are starting to break the mold. I just don't know the names. But
Is it? So I guess lecture at George Mason University every semester in their college to career course. And I will say that that instructor is on point for making sure he brings people from the outside to challenge up how those students in that one semester are thinking about what the workforce is going to be like and what that means to them, as an individual, but also for their other classmates. He makes sure that they engage. So I think that if other colleges would do that and hire the right professor, and this is an adjunct professor who does this, he's really making progress every single semester. And these kids still stay in touch with me long after they've graduated from George Mason to, continue to engage. And a lot of it has to do about that topic about, I'm in this team and I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, thanks for asking.
Yeah, I just have to make a comment because schools aren't even doing enough to teach their students about what kind of jobs they can get when they get out with the majors that they have. And the majors have become so minute. And I work a lot because I'm passionate about it with young people, and my kids have all recently, I still have one in college and a couple that have been through it. And so all their friends I talk to, I try to coach, and it would be amazing if we could help them. But I think it's so much more important for the leadership to open that up for these kids who don't have a lot of experiences and are going to be the last ones to tell you that I have Asperger's because they want a job,
I was going to say my experience has been a lot of the career centers are underfunded and under-resourced, and there isn't enough of a connect between industry and them. I'm surprised oftentimes at some of the things that they're still peddling through the career centers. And so I think it goes back to some points made earlier. We really need to be thinking about how we bridge that gap, really creating grassroots movements in some regard in terms of going back to the schools. Like something I've been really passionate about for my entire career is affecting curriculum. Going back and looking at a curriculum and saying, how well does this actually match up with the kind of person that we would hire? I've created my own academies for kids that are in schools to help them understand exactly how they'll have to present in the workforce, and ran it with like other professional friends of mine, like literally out of their houses during a break. So, I mean, it's like those sort of movements that we need to start to wrap our heads around. We have the expertise. There's a deficit. How do we start to bridge those gaps?
Can I just add to that? I agree, by the way. I think universities are challenged to deliver curriculum in and of itself. This is, I mentioned earlier, I personally do that in my team. We go to campus, we talk about this issue to all students, the importance of D&I and inclusive leadership and bias. So frankly, I put the challenge out to all. There's a lot of great organizations in this room. Why don't you go to your campuses and why don't you talk about this issue and say how important it is to your organization and challenge all the students. By the way, not just the Black and Latino and Pan-Asian students, all the students on that campus or in the business school, wherever you recruit from, around why it matters to you. Because what I found is that students, especially if they're looking to get an opportunity, sometimes they do listen to employers. So my thing is, why don't we do it?
I just wanted to add something to that. Can I be heard? Yes. Okay. It's really more of to dovetail what Ken said. It's more of a kind of a visionary, aspirational. But as a coach, like one of the things I do is help people close the gap between knowing and doing. And one of the things I see, especially in my interview coaching with young people at the early part of their career, they have these great educations, but they have no skills around applicability, accountability, implementation. And I really think more and more, if there was an initiative, and that could be really a brass ring for colleges to individuate themselves, is to have curriculum that's designed in the trenches. I mean, that's why there's so many young entrepreneurs that are opting not to go to college, and they're looking at like they want to be in the trenches every day doing it. It's a much more experiential generation. And if colleges can leverage that, and also recruitment, start writing articles about the importance of that in colleges, and that's a individuating factor in a college, I think that would make a huge difference, and we would start to shift that needle. So.
Yeah, thank you, Lois.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg. I run my own advisory firm here in Manhattan, and our industry is predominantly white males, and I cringe going to events at night because there is zero diversity, and it's the same guys always drinking at the bar. I love my industry, we do a lot of good, but there's definitely that aspect, and I started my own company because I wanted to create culture, change the culture. How, on the other side of the spectrum, how do you, I guess, connect everybody? So once you do the recruiting, I guess there's a second aspect of it. Is it through corporate wellness programs to bring everyone together? How do you get everybody in sync with each other? Does that make sense?
So there's,
I guess, where's the inclusion part? How do you execute on the inclusion?
So there's a few different things, I think. The first thing is really treating every person that walks into your organization as an individual, which HR people tend to hate. Because it's like, what, more work? I've got to get to know every single person. But there's this growing concept now in our industry about meaningful moments, right? Meaning that if I understand you, if I understand what's important to you, then I can provide meaningful experiences, moments, opportunities, upward mobility or lateral mobility, whatever that is, so that you always feel included in the environment, or you feel like what you bring to the table is valuable. So that's one prong to it. The other prong, insofar as we're talking about inclusion, is how do people assimilate into their environments? And in order for you to properly assimilate people, you have to understand what you're dealing with. So like at the CEO level, when we build a business, right? You've built one, I've built one. There's a mission, there's a vision. That's like the lofty, ideal of what we'd like the business to be, right? But as we start to get beyond a certain number of people, that starts to get a little diluted, or it starts to transmute, if you will. And then you have the issue of what I tell my clients is a cultural subcultural dynamic, right? So at the cultural level, we may have all altruistic views about how we want things to do. We want everybody to come here and feel accepted. If we're not careful and we don't have good checks and balances at the subcultural level, then we get ourselves into issues, because now we've got all these individuals that we've elevated to leadership positions that are creating these different ecosystems within the ecosystem. Some of them may play nice and be really inclusive. Some of them may be toxic. And those will be the ones where you're going to see a lot of attrition, perhaps litigation, and things of that nature. So I think it's just really important to be honest with yourself, especially if you're up there, about what is that connectivity between what we're saying we are and what's actually happening on the ground. And if there are things happening on the ground, no harm, no foul. Let's talk about it. Let's identify it. Let's fix it so that there is not that dissonance between what we intended and what we're actually doing. Does that answer your question?
Well, one word that you said that out of all the words that I wanted to zero in on is the word assimilate. In the phone call that I was in for the other panel, it was brought up that the word should be acclimate. And that was revolutionary to me to hear you all say that on that call, that it's not about assimilating people, but it's about acclimating people. And I thought, wow, this is the type of thing that I feel like can really change us up, is even when we look at terminology. Do we really want people assimilating, or do we want them acclimating? So I really wanted to bring that up. And as you were talking about, getting people, to the table and all these sort of things, I was thinking, well, Lois, what should be in our messaging, to be able to attract and retain people who have differences?
Yes, that's a really great question. I love curiosity. And that's what's so compelling about animals and children, is that they're wildly curious. And then we lose that after a certain point. And so I feel that having a cohesivity in your message, walking your talk, not just checking off the boxes. Have you sponsored events for groups with differences? What about some of your articles on LinkedIn? Maybe you didn't write a post, but maybe you comment on a post. Is a mission statement around differences really being played out? And how is that? Are you walking your talk? Everything from messaging, social media imprint, the type of questions you're asking in an interview. Is that all leading up so that people with differences don't say, oh yeah, and they're just checking off the boxes? And of course, do you have the metrics to prove it? I think that's really important. I feel the need to share this story. A colleague of mine worked with Jim Henson. And in Jim Henson's organization, that there was no bad idea. And if you gave a really bad idea, it was an inside joke, he would tap a pencil and go, interesting. And he would move on. And they were back in the powder room, locker room, whatever, saying, oh boy, that idea. But it sent a message that no idea was wrong and every idea was embraced. And I think that's such an important part with differences, because people with differences have different ideas, they have different questions, they have different observations. And by leading with curiosity and making sure that everything in your brand is cohesive with that invites people with differences.
So I love curiosity because it kind of opens us up to being somewhat accepting, or at a minimum tolerant of different viewpoints. But I think what we're really, the North Star for me is psychological safety, right? It's this ability to show up exactly as I am, Janine Truitt, to your organization with all my light and all my dark qualities, and you accept that that is of value to your organization. So if I raise an idea, it'll be heard. If I say something that's important to me, whether or not everybody else in the room agrees with it, it'll be heard and accepted as such. I think that is a universal thing. It's not even a race, color, creed thing. We all want to be heard. We all want to be valued. We all want to do good work. And so I think it's a good time to be talking about and thinking about how psychologically safe is it for an employee to show up to your organization today and really embody the fullness of who they are.
So I may not be a digital native, but I really love the tech that has been coming out and helping to enhance how we do what we do better. And Jonathan, I love that you do 1,000 demos a month or whatever it is that you do, because you're very, very, very adept at knowing the different types of tools, that can be used to help recruiters to identify diverse candidates. So can you tell us about what are some of the advantages that you've seen, and then what are some of the disadvantages that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say, so definitely not 1,000 a month. It's more like 30 a month, but it's been 6 years. And we have a whole team that's doing it, not just me anymore. Technology is not the only way to solve, diversity within your organization. It's one tool you can use, and it cannot exist by itself. Frankly, it's really a combination of where you source the talent from, what technology you're leveraging to eliminate biases through the process, and then how you deal with the hiring manager at the end. And so there's a number of different technologies. On the sourcing side, you have job boards that are just focused on certain pools of candidates. Look at Fairy Godboss. This is Glassdoor for women, right? Military Talent Group. There's Jopwell, right? And so you have to be thoughtful about where you source these candidates from and get the right people into the funnel. Once you get them into the funnel, there's technology that helps you eliminate bias from the resume, gaps in employment, removing names. I could tell you that your hiring managers are going to fight back on that one because they want to see that information. It makes their lives more difficult. But these technologies exist. There's also, technology like assessments that can come in and say, hey, we don't care actually who this person is, we just care if they could do the job. And so how and where you leverage these technologies in your process, affect the positives or negatives that they bring. What are some of the positives where you eliminate, if you leverage, for example, an assessment, you eliminate some of the bias that the people would bring to the equation. But they're not perfect. I can tell you, I'm one of the predictions that I'm making for 2020 is that there's a lot of noise around the validity of the assessments out in the space, and I think that the bottom is going to fall out big time because I don't think many of them are valid. And so we'll see that what happens there. But I think that these tools can help you in making sure that you hire diverse talent.
Right. And Kesa, can you tell us how Phenom People is leveraging specific tools, technology-wise, to meet accessibility standards?
Sure. Back on. Phenom People, we are a talent experience platform, and our focus is on the experience, whether that be candidate, end user, manager, recruiter, depending. And a product that we just rolled out is Phenom Access, and that really puts into play the user. So when a user comes to the career site, is that no matter what type of user that is, and it's on our mission to find 1 billion people the right job, whether they be blind, any disability they have, each of our career sites now are accessible. So we're offering all of our current clients free accessibility audits. And as we continue into the future, Phenom Access is the platform that will make all of the career sites accessible. So it doesn't matter what type of disability you have. So that's what we're doing.
Great. And so when we're looking actually at making sure that we're leveling the ability for everybody to be able to come in, Lois, how can people here, are there specific things that they can do to help underrepresented people, specifically those, with neurodiverse challenges, to shine in a very competitive work environment?
Absolutely. It's a really great question. One of the things actually, one of my clients just got placed in a really good firm. They had a very specific, very noticeable as soon as they walk through the door disability. And one of the things I think of is I love stories. Stories, now they've done studies that it retains memory, emotional recall, emotional connection. So what I work with my clients is something I call story selling, using your stories to create value, educate your client, and close deals. So I have my candidates put together, cobble together stories of how they are different and how they rock. And the first step is to look at job descriptions. Yes, there's the hard skills, but you want to look at themes and soft skills. We're in a work environment, soft skills are actually overriding hard skills. So are they looking for critical thinking? Are they looking for tenacity, self-study? So how do we cobble together stories that are a composite instead of saying, I'm a good thinker, I'm a this, the I syndrome, the stories, facts tell, stories sell. How do we put those stories together? And most people with disabilities have overcome them, or a lot of them, and that's what makes them a winning candidate. And why not play that up? The other thing is with extracurricular activities. Maybe with learning challenges, you didn't get a high GPA, but you're a rock star with extracurriculars. How are you leveraging that? I also feel like in the interview process, humor. One of my clients had a physical challenge, handicap. So one of the first lines I had her work with is, I can help you with A, B, and C, but don't expect me to be on your softball team. And of course, the interviewer laughed. It sent a message, hey, I'm not playing the disability card, but I don't take myself so seriously. So I think all of those things, and to look at how can you knit those together and really show that the overcoming of your challenges is what's going to make you a winning candidate.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to ruling people in. Find every way to try to rule people in rather than ruling them out, because I think that we need to flip this script on that.
I want to touch on one specific part, and that's the underrepresented and minority narrative, since we're talking about stories. So it's a ongoing story for people of color and all sorts of groups that were somehow underrepresented and minorities. And I'm going to challenge the audience to not just take the view of it from work and what you've been told, and really look at the numbers, and look at the numbers not just for the US, look at it globally. There is nothing about a person that looks like me that is a minority at all. In fact, if you read up, most economists will tell you by 2050, most of the world's economy will be focused in Africa and Asia. Who lives there, right? So I really want to kind of challenge us to start to change the narrative a bit about what is underrepresented and what's a minority. If you read most things, according to most, we've been at 13% African American since like the 60s. How's that possible? Right? And when you think about affirmative action plans and how we have to self-identify, a lot of that is skewed, right? When we think about it, what is considered Caucasian and what is considered Asian and all this sort of thing. So not to take us too far off track, but I do think it's an important distinction for you as recruitment professionals and HR professionals to think about.
So Janine, if you could just take it one step further and just tell us what are some opportunities that are tied to hiring neurodiverse candidates.
They're some of your best employees, quite frankly. If you can just find the work in the organization that is suited for their skill set. So one of the things that I did working for Brookhaven National Laboratory was we had an instrumentation division, and I had been doing quite a bit of work in the disability community, particularly around neurodiverse candidates. One of our claim to fame at that time was we can't hire them. They don't have bachelor's degrees, they don't have PhDs. We can maybe offer them a tour, or maybe we can offer them a short internship. And so I worked with them, I did that, but I wasn't satisfied. I'm like, there's no way you can't tell me that we can't create something here where we can put them to work. I want an apprenticeship to work situation. And so we really sat down as a group, a multifunctional group, and looked at the org chart and said, okay, what are the barriers to entry in all of our divisions? And if there's a division, what is the one division where we could actually get people in without them having to have a bachelor's degree or a PhD, and that the work would actually suit their skill set? And so it was instrumentation, where they were basically focused on building things. It was pretty monotonous, working in a shop, if you will. And so I went there, I looked around, I worked with the hiring manager. It turns out the hiring manager had some people that had Asperger's in their family, so they were sympathetic to what I was trying to do. And we really looked at, what would they be doing? What was an apprenticeship look like? And what would that look like if we were to hire them? Unfortunately, the funding and all of that didn't go through for us to really see that through. But I think even where there's not opportunity, there's opportunity. You just have to be willing and actually care enough to create those pathways for somebody to have an opportunity. So I'm not of the opinion that there's any sort of magic trick to this. I think that if you're in a place of power, if you're a person of influence or you care enough, I think you should find the advocates in the organization and the people that care enough like you to try to build alliances so that you can have that sort of thing happen.
Okay, so I don't want to be the person who makes us all late for lunch. Yep. Don't want to have that rep. But does anybody have a burning question that they would like to ask the panelists at this time?
Otherwise, yep. No, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Joe. And last time we didn't do this, but we did it afterwards. But we're thanking everybody with a gift card for being.
Thank you.
Thank you so
That
much.
Gen Z. Thank you.
Thank you again for everybody rejoining us. So our closing keynote is a woman that Faith and I had the pleasure of meeting about a year ago, Roy Hartsfield. So we were fortunate enough last year to have the equivalent conference to this, where the theme was on artificial intelligence, hosted by Google, at their Mountain View campus. And one of the people who signed up, I don't know, a week or something, maybe 2 weeks before the deadline, was this person, and we didn't know who she was, but I see the company name come across, and it's Central Intelligence Agency. It's like, okay, this is going to be interesting. Those of us who are nerds, it's like, this is going to be really interesting. So we're at the reception the evening before. We're sitting down. We're having some appetizers. There may have been an adult beverage involved or two. And she sits down next to us, and we're having this nice conversation. And it's like, where are you from again? I'm just like, from the CIA. It's like, oh, you're that one. She didn't share any war stories with us, but she did share some stuff that I knew at that moment in time. I have got to have her come and speak. And one of the things that I think I shared with you was that I didn't know that the CIA was involved in helping to end human trafficking. Okay, if I'm a Gen Z, that's an issue that I'm pretty concerned about. And, I think that that's an area that the organizations who are involved in real incredible social justice causes like that, they need to do a better job of communicating it. Not just for selfish reasons. There are good selfish reasons for doing that, but also to lead, to show by example that we can all do better. Ken, you talked a number of times this morning, and it was fantastic about, we don't have to wait for the schools to do this, for example. If you don't think that the students are being prepared, go on campus. Just about every single professor would be, I would love to have you as a guest speaker. Come into my classroom. It'd be fantastic. So Roy was talking about human trafficking. She's not here to talk about that today, sadly, but maybe buy her a glass of wine or something later, and she will. But what she is here to talk about is an issue that we all struggle with. It relates to diversity and inclusion specifically, but it also relates to a lot of other issues in so-called cost centers, like HR, and that is getting buy-in from the C-suite. How do you get your manager, how do you get your hiring manager, how do you get the CFO to give you the money, to give you permission to do these great things? You may have great ideas, but if you just go and give them the warm fuzzies, it's going to be really hard for somebody at the CEO, CFO, COO level to say yes to that. I can't even imagine the bureaucracy that must exist in a big governmental organization, whether that's an intelligence agency or, the IRS or whatever. The layers that they have to go through, the number of people along that path that can say no. You might get 10 yeses and 1 no, and it kills it. So in about 20 minutes, Roy's going to teach us everything there is to know about that. So Roy, welcome.
I have to hold this the entire time? If I'm a little nervous, well, public speaking is a nervous thing, but it's also because we're not used to being filmed. And I learned last night this is my sweet side, right? Yeah, okay. That could be my sweet side. Hello again, my name is Roynda Hartsfield. Everybody just calls me Roy. And yes, I'm really from the CIA. We're real people. This is not a disguise. This is actually my hair. Let's see. I have been a STEM officer for 29 years. I just retired. And I have lived most of my life and most of my career has been overseas in very hard areas. And I am used to getting information from my client, from whatever division I'm helping, and I see what they want. I design it. I deploy. I modify. I deploy. And I thought, and my first mistake was, I thought I could do that with D&I, right? They dragged me back from the field unwillingly, and I was head of the director of support doing all their IT. And they said, well, we'd really like you to concentrate on diversity leadership studies. So I became the deputy chief of diversity leadership study under the director, John Brennan, which he plays a lot into this role. Sorry, I got to put my glasses on here. So I tell you, trying to ask people to modify their behavior and to look inside, that's pretty. I know everybody's nodding at me. That's pretty hard to do. I couldn't even get my husband to do it. He was my case file, right? So he is a Caucasian male engineer from Rochester, New York. So if I knew it was working, my husband was pretty much on it. Well, if you think about it, the CIA, we are a premier intelligence organization, and how we succeed is if we actually reflect who's in this audience, who's in the United States. And when John Brennan took office as our director, he looked to his left and to his right, and he looked down into the emerging leaders that were coming up in rank, and he said, man, everybody looks like me. Well, not necessarily from New Jersey and Irish, but pretty much from his same background. And he said, there's no way that this is going to work over the next 5 years if we're really going to be looking at hard targets. And we're going to need people with native language, understanding those nuances into different cultures. So he asked Vernon Cook, who was head of the president of the Urban League, to get a bunch of senior advisors and look at our statistics of what we're doing wrong in the agency. And here's the thing with Brennan. It's been done many times before, and it ended up in 86 in a file somewhere. That happens at a lot of organizations. But Brennan put his money where his mouth was. And he asked Vernon, he said, I want you to give it to me unvarnished. And that is exactly what Vernon did. And it was pretty brutal the first time I read the study. And by the way, the study's online. It's called Diversity Leadership Study. You can look it up. Some of the slides are from there. And that's pretty much what he did. Let me go here. So this was the findings. I won't read it to you. Again, pretty much everybody looked like everybody up on the C-suite, as well as those that they were grooming to come up. And that was a big issue. So here is basically the findings of the study. And I won't read them to you, but for the sake of this is the college recruiter, I'm basically going to look at the recruitment efforts. Because to me, all things lead through recruitment, don't they? You have to get the talent in, you have to keep the talent, you have to grow the talent. Basically, what the findings is the lack of prioritization results in an unequal development of officers and perpetuates the belief among many officers that people development is not part of achieving mission. I can say that from the ground up. If my manager that was from the old school, not being ageist here, I am old school, right? But if that's the way that he behaved and he moved up the ranks, well then that must be the way that I must behave, and that must be the way that I mentor my people to behave. So we had to change that. So Director Brennan, the first thing he did is he made his seniors accountable for D&I. Within 6 months, every executive senior officer had diversity inclusion as one of their performance objectives. And there is one thing about the CIA, for us, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, right? So I just can't go to a Martin Luther King event and then that's a checkbox, right? No, I have to blog about it. I need to be attending an agency resource group, an ARG, that is not like me. I need to be really looking out at who is in my staff, what types of people, backgrounds do I actually need to complete my teams. But then he went steps further. He affected bonus with this. Yeah. Oh, all of a sudden I got your attention, right? That's exactly what happened to the C-suite. Oh, that's going to affect my end of the year bonus, my exceptional performance awards? Yeah, it did. And believe me, he held tight to that. And not only did he hold tight, but all of the C-suite and every directorate did. As well as it also affected future assignments. Now, if you're looking at a projection of a career, you basically said, oh, I want this job, that job, right? Well, if you're blocked from having a job that you really wanted because you weren't given it all in diversity and inclusion, that kind of messed you up over the next 5 to 6 years. So just that alone helped alter some of the C-suite's opinion. I'm not saying that they weren't on board. There were a lot of people on board. As the director says, we need many different prisms to look through when we're looking at hard operational issues. Not only do we need you at the table, but we need your full voice at the table, regardless if you're agreeing with us or not. And that's a hard gig to do. All right. Okay, so I'm Hawaiian, so we talk story a lot, right? So I have this love and hate with statistics. This is me on a bench. Looks like I'm doing a secret ops, right? I'm about to put that X on, and they're going to come and do a brush pass with me. No, I'm actually in Belgium waiting for the waffle stand to open across the street. Right? So you have to be very careful with stats. You have to make sure that even when you're asking for the stats, that there's not bias just in the question that you're looking at. You have to make sure that the data you get, you're never going to have pure data, but that it's the best data that you could do on the day that you are running that data, right? And what we do is verify, verify, verify. So we ended up not using one HR resource, but several. And on top of that, making sure that we were interviewing employees and retired employees. They used hundreds of employees for this. So it just wasn't about the stats, it was also about the feelings of how people felt. I think I have another story here. Hold on just a second. If I don't stay to the program, then I get in trouble. Whoops. So I am from the Directorate of Digital Innovation, so this is all your cyber, your data scientists, I think STEM rocks. And again, when I'm pitching a new program, a new platform, I can't go and pitch without telling a story. No data without a story, no story without data. This helps a lot because what it does is it helps whoever it is that you're asking, the C-suite, whoever, it's getting to the bottom line. And it helps drive in, I guess on a human point, what you're actually asking for. The other thing is you have to get off the X. Do you guys understand what that means? That's an operational term. It means when everything's hot and heavy and and there's stuff coming at me, I have to jump over left or right and I have to get off the X. This is where I think our C-suite actually did well. What we did is we found out people really have good intentions. Don't they have good intentions? And sometimes they're not the right way to give back in diversity and inclusion. So we actually came up with a list. We love lists on how to give back to diversity and inclusion. And I have to say, the C-suite went off. They did. They came out on the lines with us at a recruiting events. There's nothing like hearing Sean Roach talk about his challenges growing up at a university. The students just eat it up, right? And not only that, but we were pairing them with new employees, right? So here you have the senior telling, the whole career story, and then you have our new officer saying, well, this was my journey going through the security process. We try not to hide from that. We try to, bring back the veil, and this has been my experience. John Brennan was up in New York, and he was the keynote speaker at Pride and Prejudice, an LGBTQ event. I mean, I just have so many stories about how once they were told, who was that we were talking about? Once they were authorized, basically, or permitted to do these things, and you gave them the list, they loved it. And in so many ways, for instance, mentoring somebody that doesn't look like you. I mean, that doesn't seem so hard to do, right? But that was an eye-opener, just not for the C-suite. I actually find that, to me, the hardest gig was that team lead and that second management layer. That, to me, that was the nut that was really hard to break. And then making the C-suite accountable, and this is my story. I hope I don't get in trouble for this. All right. Well, I like to tell the good and the bad and the ugly. I had this officer. Well, he was a senior officer. He was my boss's boss's boss. And I had just come back from that office. And this office is a lot of engineers. And they're mostly Caucasian male of, all with STEM backgrounds. And I'm doing my D&I gig, and I'm up there, and I'm showing them their stats, and I'm pleading with them, let's at least look at this. And I'm kind of doing a soft pitch. I wasn't even doing a hard pitch. And no joke, the guy at the table that's in charge, we'll call him Steve. Steve goes, Roy, you know what the problem is? When there's a hard job, people like you don't apply. And he said this in front of the entire senior staff. And I said, people like me? Are you talking about minority female? And he goes, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm like, brother, it's on, right? It's on. I have the full authority of the director. I'm speaking truth to power. And I said, well, Steve, when people like you mentor, and you're a network engineer from Ohio State, Caucasian male, and everybody in your back pocket that you reach out to is what? A network engineer, white, basically from, Ohio State. Then what chance do I have? And not only that, but if this person makes a mistake during the job, we're grooming them, he's growing. But let me make that mistake, and it was, oh my goodness, that was too much of a stretch. Maybe we shouldn't give her assignment. And then I really laid it on, because I said, not only that, but I know if you're hunting me in the hallway to even offer me that job, that's pretty much a very, a crap job, and nobody really wants it, right? So where are you going to be when I am not as successful as I can be? And you could have heard a pin drop, and I'm thinking, oh Lord, here we go. And he pulled me aside later, and first he apologized, and he said, how can I change? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Right now, this is the guy that's in charge of all the deployment out into your war theater, right? So this is a very important guy. And I told him, I said, don't look at our color and our our femaleness. Look at our performance appraisals. Look at them without judgment, right? And there are a lot of good women that are working for you now that just need that chance to go out. And within 4 months, guess what? He did just that. And not only that, but he supported them in their assignment. And all of those women that he took out on that time have succeeded, progressed, and been promoted. So I'm very proud. But my knees were shaking. All right. Okay. Again, here's my stats. This is dated from 2014, because this was when I was the chief. But you can see the agency population is right here. So what it's basically saying is that throughout their career, most minorities and females were not rising past GS13, which is what we would consider right below emerging leader. And that's pretty good. Here's a bonus question. For the agency, what nationality or background do you think it's hard to hire for? Nope. Hispanic female. in a STEM. And why is that? Culturally, do they really want, I mean, do they trust the agency? Yeah, culturally. Isolation, yeah. Yeah, so, you know, so what do we do about that? If you, over here, by grade, the common attributes to senior rank, this is probably one of the smartest things we did, I think, is we took all of our executives and we said, what were those attributes? How did you get to be here? And these were the 4 attributes that they all came, it was a single thread. Technical expertise, you gotta be good at what you do. And I'm the worst. Don't come to me and ask me to sponsor you or mentor you and you're not giving me it all, right? Networking, or as I say, guanxi, right? Now I'm gonna use my husband as my example. He's from New York. He knew how to network from birth. He'll meet you and automatically start thinking, how can I use this person? Not in a bad way, but, how can I connect them? Whereas I was not doing that. And that is a huge difference between the 13 and the 14. Calculated risk-taking. I know as women, we're a little gun-shy on calculated risk-taking. In fact, I was just talking, I won't call her out, but I was talking to a woman here today. We were talking about a position, and the first thing she did was started going down the vacancy notice of what the requirements were, right? And worried that the company won't like her. And I said, oh, sister, you got it wrong. It's what you're bringing to them. If I like a job, I don't even really look at the bullets. I just apply, and then I tell them why it's awesome to have me there, right? So, that's a whole different mindset. And then mentoring and sponsorship, that is key. That is key, especially when you're at that panel, you have to have some advocates in your corner, right? And that is exactly, and I had to explain this to my mentees, that is exactly why they were getting upset, because certain people were getting asked on tiger teams and for certain assignments. A lot of that happens in the back room when they're first looking at assignments going, I think Roy could do that job, right? You want to be one of those people. Now, wouldn't that be nice to know those common attributes when you entered on duty? Wouldn't that be nice to know so you could already start working for it? With the mentoring that was happening across the C-suite, and by the way, is that politically correct to say millennials? The new generation was upward mentoring the director and the deputy director of the CIA. And let me tell you, they were not nice. They were giving it to them like, hey, this is not good with me. And it turns out, and it was funny because they talked about it at Brennan's table. And they didn't realize that all the mistakes that they were making. And they have better relationships with their kids now. Well, they're cooler, right? But they could understand the prism of which they were coming from. Sorry. Okay, by education. I was like going back and forth on this. As an Asian Pacific Islander, we actually have the highest numbers of doctorates and master's degrees in the agency, and yet as the Asian Pacific Islander, we weren't rising past 13 normally. And I almost got ran out of my own agency resource group because I was their senior advisor, and I was like, listen, in my old school, right, I come in, I look down, I do my job, and I'm supposed to be rewarded. But that is not how life is here. You have to look up, you have to take some risk with your journey as an agency officer. You have to raise your hand and do what we call goat belly projects, which means those things that must get done, but you're probably not gonna get credit for, right? So you have to take some risk. And we were very risk averse, at least in that ARG. And so what I did is I brought in people that were not like Asian Pacific Islanders to help mentor them. And they, the 20 officers that I was mentoring, they've all risen and grown. A lot of them are out in the field now, so I'm very proud of them. But that was an eye-opener for my own people. And I have to say, I was part of the problem because I was stagnant at GS-13. I'm out in the field and I'm hitting my head and I'm like, why is so-and-so being promoted over me? Why am I not? And it took a mentor to tell me. My mentor, Jack, would come in at 5 a.m. DC time to mentor me out in the foreign field. And he made me sign a non-disclosure because he told me everything. And he said, you need to go out and do these types of projects. And what my thing is, I love the pointy end of the spear. I love the sexy, right? I like the new tech. And he said, you got to do some of that back end stuff. So I did, and it actually helped. All right. Male, female. You guys a little surprised by this one? As you can see, Caucasian females have risen a lot over the years. In fact, if I was probably going to run this again, it'd probably be higher. Not so much for minority women and minority men. Why do you think that is? Nobody? You got something on your, I can tell you got something to say.
They don't want to be involved with the man.
They don't want to be, sometimes it's a hard gig. A lot of our Caucasian females were being mentored by Caucasian males at this point. And I have to say, and I applaud my sisters because they organize very, very well. And I have to say our female ARG group is, it's very strong. And the great thing is the Caucasian female has turned around and helped everybody else. Not only minorities and males, but a lot of the what we consider mid-hires, people just coming into the agency over the age of 30. Well, I guess that's and then, so if I were to run these numbers again, it'd actually be much stronger. But I wanted to keep that in there. Go ahead.
So I'm not surprised by that, right? The reality is white females have been great beneficiaries of all the D&I.
Yes.
That's just a fact.
Yes.
It's a fact. That's great, but this is how it is.
Well, here's my story. I don't know what to do about that except for I know that my Amazon warriors are helping other Amazon warriors now, at least in the agency. I can attest to that. So it's one of the most senior ranking engineers probably in the agency. Just forward-leaning guy. And he called me one day and he said, Roy, do you think I'm inclusive? And I was like, what shall I call him? I said, Hank, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to take that back. Because this is me you're calling. He goes, no, I really want to know. And I said, no, you're not. And like my other guy, Steve, I said, you're from Clemson. You're a short white male. And your deputy is from Clemson, short white male. We've all traveled together, right? And he's like, well, I don't understand. Why is that a bad thing? I said, well, with my time with you, because we served overseas together, here I am, a minority female apps developer, right? And yet I have a different prism from you. And there was a lot of times operationally where you guys came to that conclusion too quick. And I brought that which is the other, the devil's advocate, into the, so through me, and actually both my husband too, who didn't have a networking background, he was a platform guy. We did a lot of great things together because we were a team. And he goes, well, I didn't see it that way. So what he did, and I know he had an affinity for strong women with opinions. He did. He just wants to do the work, right? He doesn't, but that's not what inclusion is about, is it? Inclusion is about bringing everybody's voice, and there has to be some tension in the room. But I gotta say, he got up and he looked to his left and the right, and he said, I have missed this person that I've been overseas with. I've missed this person that came up with this great platform. He goes, why don't I take a chance? To me, it really wasn't a chance. It was the smartest thing he could have done, and put them on my team, and he did. And those people also rose in rank. And not only that, but then once those other officers saw do that, right, other officers that were like, I know, I just totally gave up the name, right? They started doing the same thing because they saw him winning. They saw him getting more funding. Things got turned over quicker, right? He was taking a chance. And that's all he needed was that gentle push. And I got to say, I'm very proud, very, very proud of the officer that he is. He's always been a great officer. All right.
There's a study that the Klayman Institute did last year, I think it was, or the year before, and I can send you guys a copy of it they did a study on underrepresented men and women in promotional velocity, mobility velocity, because they felt like it wasn't great and the outcome was exactly what they thought. But there were some interesting intersections around certain types of companies and how, and it goes back to what you said, was how white women were rising faster because they had white male sponsors and stuff. And so I just found that super quote that you said that very interesting. Like, that's what's out there too in some of the areas. But the Clement Institute comes out as a gender research institute, and it comes out of Stanford University. And a lot of their studies you can find online. But if you can't find it, just ping me, because I thought it was super close to what you're talking about.
I ain't hating on anybody. I'm just saying that's the stats. Do you have something to say?
Did anybody else have? No.
Okay. I think this got stuck, so I hope I didn't pass anything. So, measured progress within 15 months. So, my next assignment was basically the chief of DDI hiring. So, this is all your recruitment. And when I took over, it was something like 26%. And the diversity numbers were not that good. By looking at our hiring, and I'm talking about, and this is the beauty, and I'd applaud you if you really got a lot of C-suite behind you, but this is why Brennan made a difference, and as well as Gina and Pompeo. It didn't matter who was in charge. They knew the bottom line was about getting people in. Is we rose up over 250% in our hiring. And what it came from was looking at our hiring standards, taking the bias out of questions, trying to take the bias. I mean, we're not there yet, right? Taking the bias of when you're actually face-to-face doing the recruiting. And then I'm really proud of these numbers because if you think about it, I'm competing with your Google, your Amazon, and I love those companies, so don't get me wrong, because they helped me out a lot. But that's pretty good for a government agency. And to think that we rose and stayed at 40% with our minority numbers across hard STEM, that's a pretty good deal. And I'm especially proud of our TISO cadre. Our TISO cadre are officers. They're in charge of satellites all the way down to the land, right? Most of them are ex or retired military Caucasian male, right? And yet they were part of the solution. They got their butts out because once they saw that, hey, we actually need this, that which is the other, they were out recruiting at all events. They were correcting other officers about when their biases were popping up. And they had the highest number of diversity hires. It was our TISO cadre, so I'm very happy. And the back end of that is we got more students in. Not only did we get more students in, but then they saw that their voices mattered, right? And then they stayed. So I think we're like 85, 90% of retention of turning an intern over into staff. I know, right? That's pretty good. I always say go somewhere else because you're never going to get a better data set than what I have. So, yeah, go ahead. You'll come back. I'll play the long game with you. And really looking at the LGBTQ plus events, HBCUs, we have signature schools that we really invest more time in. If you want to know what it's like to interview for the agency or what's it like to do a STEM briefing to a layman audience, guess what? We will help you with that, right, for our signature schools. I got this a lot. We went to Lesbians Who Tech, an event that I really loved, and they're like, why are you here? Right? So, there's the whole myth of the agency, of what we were in the past, and it's kind of nice to break that. And I tell you what, best GPAs, LGBTQ community, great at empathy, great at adversity, and, just great officers. And then with our hiring advisors and our recruiters, you had to own what you did out in the field. right? So if I'm out mentoring and coaching, if I'm out recruiting, you had to own whatever it is that you were there, and you were being held responsible for that. So all of them got unconscious bias. The DDI was the first directorate to put empathetic questions and diversity questions in. And oddly enough, we had to go through legal to get that done, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm willing to do it. And then in the end, I think our people stayed because they were Ohana. And that's a Hawaiian term for somebody that isn't necessarily family, but they have your best interest at heart. So I think that's why our retention has been remarkable. I don't know if this is actually working here. Okay, my last story. Okay, where we are today, we have a lot of legacy, and we have better hiring practices, but they are not like perfect. We still are evolving every day. And there is wider mentoring and coaching, just not classic, who's in my office or whatever, but across the directorate. I have mentored people from across the IC, and you really learn about different other agencies. And also, like I was saying before, headquarters and field. The beauty part is if people don't even think about D&I, right? If it just becomes a part of their day-to-day life. We're not there yet. That's what we're trying to do in talent acquisition. So we're trying all different things. I was telling somebody that we were actually considering, talk about things that didn't work. Have you ever gone to a racing event like a Talladega 500 or something like that, right? And you see the pit crew? Do you know there's algorithms on how to pick a good pit crew? Can you lift 500 pounds? What's your speed like on a river? And we actually, thought, could you do that with a team? Just take the names away? Could you actually just look at performance and actually build a pit crew? But that didn't work out. So, we were turning every stone over, right? And understanding unconscious bias, every executive had to take unconscious bias. And there was something different between sitting in a classroom and actually implementing. And this is where my last story is. He was the chief of Counterterrorism Center. So we're talking about the guy that goes after the big, hard targets downrange. And he's a very tall white male. And I'm giving him his numbers. Obviously, I hated giving everybody their numbers because that's when all the hard conversations came in. And he said, I took that unconscious bias class. And he goes, I was really surprised. And I'm like, oh, yeah? And he goes, yeah, I took the class, and then a week later, something was going on downrange, and I had to come in, and I had to get this email out, and it was really urgent, and I couldn't remember the group name, so I hand-packed everybody's name in. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, who do you think I forgot? And I'm like, I am not answering this question. And he goes, I forgot this woman. And he goes, do you think she noticed? Do you think she noticed? Yeah. I was like, yeah, dude, I think she noticed. And he goes, not only that, but she was African American. And I was like, okay. Hey, man, I'm not judging. I got biases too. And I'm like, okay. So I looked at him. I was like, dude, what are you going to do about it? And he goes, first, I want to apologize to her. And I'm thinking, oh, man, was she in Egypt or Syria? He goes, no, man, she sits right there. And I'm like, oh, man, this. He goes, at first, I want to apologize to her about leaving her off the note. And then he went one step further. And this is why I worship this man. He held an all hands, because he normally does every quarter, and he specifically talked about unconscious bias. He made everybody in the Counterterrorist Center take the unconscious bias class, and they talked about what does that mean when they operationally go after an asset, when they're looking at internal and external recruiting. He held them to point. And I'm just like, man, I know you jacked up over here, but you sure made up for it over here, right? And he is one of the most senior members of the Directorate of Operations. And when he retired, I had the honor of coming to his retirement, and the very last thing he talked about was how much he really enjoyed giving back to diversity and inclusion. So he has, to me, he's been a role model. And I have to say, from the ground up, speaking truth to power is probably one of the best things we gave to our legacy.
Let's bring your panel up while, if
okay.
there's a question, that's fine. But let's also bring the panel up.
We really, while they're coming up, we really were trying to look at every avenue, doing benchmarking with other companies about what worked and what didn't work. I have to say, Brennan, having Brennan back you was really good. Okay, we ready? Would you all like to take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves and your background? Oh, you guys go.
My name's Jerry Crispin. I am a student learner, a lifelong learner. Probably the only thing that's worthwhile knowing about me right now is that my first job, I know, you're laughing over there. My first job was 2 blocks from here at Stevens Institute of Technology, where in order to put myself through graduate school, my first job was in career services. It was kind of an interesting time, learned a lot, set me on an interesting path that's been around. And this year, I celebrated 2 blocks from here, my 50th year from graduation. It's cool. So if you harbor any unconscious bias about old white guys, I got to tell you, get over it for the moment.
Hi, my name's Marjorie McCamey. I'm on the spectrum and I have dyslexia, so apologies if I refer to my notes at times. I am a senior recruiter with Franklin Templeton Investments. Have been doing actually contract recruiting for a lot of years. I also work with a company called Interns, INTRNZ. It's a startup, and we partner with PACE New School and School for Visual Arts to provide summer housing and internship experiences in New York City. My first HR, I started in fashion and had an unexpected turn where I went to work in the career services office for what was then the oldest women's secretarial school in New York. It was on a bet. I went, fell in love with the job, and have been in human resources for 30 plus years. So worked with students, worked with interns, co-ops, love working with this particular age range. So I will pass it on.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ankit Somani. Because it's a diversity and inclusion panel, I'm an immigrant. I came to this country about 12 years ago, and just amazing opportunities that the country gave. So I'm very blessed to be here. I'm also the co-founder of Alio. How many of you have heard of Alio, by the way, prior to this event? Okay, got it. I know Stephen did a fantastic job sharing a few times what Alio does, but just to give you a short bit about it, Alio really helps HR broadly and recruiting specifically communicate better. And by better, I mean more delightful and efficient. And the way we do that is at the base offer a communication channel that works better in this day and age, which is texting and other form of having a conversation. And on top of it, bots to automate parts of those conversations. So think about screening, scheduling, helping somebody find a job, responding to a survey, asking questions, all of it. And we believe the combination of it really breaks down the walls around HR when it comes to people and makes it more personable for somebody who wants to chat with HR. So that's a little bit about me.
One sec, I just want to make sure everybody knows we will stop at 2:30 because I know people have trains and planes to catch. So get your questions in as things go on.
Sorry if it was me that went over. And the first question is to you. What does low bias recruiting look like?
So I look at low bias recruiting. Again, my learning is both for the company that I have as well as the customers that we work with. And I've seen at least 2 key elements of it. The first is on the candidate side. So on the candidate side, I think of it as equal opportunity for everybody at every step. which means that whoever I am, wherever I am, I should be able to apply and in a fair way get assessed for the job, a fair way to get interviewed for the job, have the right opportunity to move forward. Even if I'm a talent or an employee working in a company, I should have a fair way to express my opinion. So there is something from a candidate perspective. But now when you look at the recruiting teams, there it's about really understanding, we've heard a lot about unconscious biases, but it's about really understanding what is a fair way to judge someone, how quickly you're making a perception in your mind versus not, and where is it that you can make a nuanced decision versus in other places where you may actually lead people on the wrong route. So it's the right combination of technology where it works best, gives opportunity to everybody, and then humans as they come in and really layer on top of any given conversation the moral angle associated with it.
So what type of training and accountability would that take?
Yeah, and I'd love to invite others to join in as well. But I've seen two aspects of training. One is on the recruiting front, what questions can you ask? What questions should you really ask? How should you interact with somebody? How objective should you be? There's a piece about being objective which is very empowering because if you are taking in all the data, then at the end of the day, you're really evaluating based on data. But sometimes if you know somebody's cultural background, maybe you're able to be a little bit more lenient with them on one angle versus the other. So for example, in some cultures, it's you want the permission to have a conversation or you want the permission to take a step, whereas in others, it's okay to ask for forgiveness. And people operate differently in different cultures. So I think that is the layer where training really needs to be brought in my mind. Any other thoughts?
Well, the only thing that occurs to me is you also have to understand the willingness of your culture, of your company's culture, to be able to expand to handle some of those issues. Because obviously the learning and the training can take time. They take cost, and we should be investing in that. And we should try to maximize the kind of our ability to adjust our culture to be able to accommodate folks who are coming in. And knowing that continues to be different, that it continues to evolve.
Well, since you were talking about money, could you give me an example of gaining allies to convince the C-suite to not only give me money, but their time?
The only piece to this is, and I always think in terms of tactics versus strategy. So if I'm sitting in a seat, my tactic is I want to know who are the most influential folks pretty much underneath the C-suite, the ones that the C-suite are looking at for that next move. And I want to make them extraordinarily successful. And so I try to influence by helping be successful the people who I think are extraordinary performers within the organization and the most open to being able to do it in ways that add value really for our culture long term. There's always a few. There's always the idiots that I hope leave at some point, and they're the ones that I'm going to send those great jobs to that come in for other companies, especially with competitors. But that's a whole different set of tactics. So one is the tactical side, and the other, very honestly, is the strategy, and that is I view myself as world-class, and I would want anybody who is in our space to view themselves that way. And that means understanding operationally what it takes to do that. And if you really believe that we should be changing things and getting the money, then you need to learn how to do the right kinds of projects that analyze the data within the organization, develop proposals, and find people you can submit those proposals to, and do it over and over again until either you start winning or you find that somebody else in another company is going to take you so that you can be in a leadership position and make things happen. You can wait for the leaders to tell you or become aware of what goes on, or you can try to sell the leaders, even the toughest ones, but sell them based on what they know, which is does it cost and what is the return in the short and long term. And if you need help doing that, then go talk to the CFO and say, hey, you know, I'm new in my job. I'm trying to better understand how to win here, and I want you to help me develop the kind of templates that work in this organization, because this is what I want to propose. And I've seen that over and over again in small doses in almost every company, and I bet most of you have, where somebody has just become a star, a shooting star, because they're willing to get outside of their job box and say, you know, this company needs something a little bit different, and they went and got help to get it done. That's how I do it.
So, Roy, you talked about your Amazon warriors, and I have to say at Franklin Templeton, you know, we're a global company with over 9,000 employees. And we have a woman I'd call an Amazon warrior, Jenny Johnson, who is part of the family that founded this public company, but she will be raising. She is moving into the CEO position as of February. And so we've been listed as, last 3 years running, as a great company, one of the best companies to work for LGBTQ. The D&I was folded into our corporate goals, I think 3 years ago. So it's on everyone's performance evaluation. Everyone has that throughout the company as part of their performance evaluation and part of their bonus opportunity. So,
Hit them where it hurts, right?
yeah.
So how are they being measured, though? So in their performance appraisals, I mean, what are like the top 3 things that they're like, wow, okay, they're definitely giving back and into the LGBT?
Well, so we've got business resource groups throughout the company. We are people are involved in those. We also have a program called Involved. 1 day a year is a paid day off to work in your community. You can work with your team. You can work with your department. We have events going on all year long, and as part of your performance evaluation, you have to write in there what you have done to contribute to that. So it's high accountability.
Good. Okay, and Kat, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. How does leadership take the pulse of the people in diversity and inclusion? There's a perception and then there's a reality. So.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. There was a lot of stats shown here throughout the day. But to me, even though I'm a numbers guy, numbers don't have that same level of impact. So I'll give you a very real example. We ran a pulse survey, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. It was shared maybe 5 a.m. in the morning by the HR leader. And I remember between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., all I was doing was not looking at the numbers, but looking at the qualitative feedback that people gave. So there was a simple question that was asked, in 3 words, describe the culture, right? And there's so much that you can even get out of something like that. So one of the very undervalued things, just because everybody's calibration is at a different level, a very undervalued thing is to get qualitative feedback from people. And then it's very easy for any leader in the company to relate with somebody. Like if I know you super well and I hear a feedback from you which is qualitative, it's in a sentence that I can read and understand, the reaction I'll have to that is very different. I'm like, wow, she feels that way, I need to change something. So in terms of measurement, I haven't found yet from the customers that we work with, numbers really creating that amazing level of impact. I've seen the qualitative side really do that well. At least that's a perspective.
There's a shift for me, though, that's different. And that is, it's combining not just our technology to be able to do a quick pulse survey, which we weren't able to do as easily years ago. But today we could do that. And so you do something in the morning, you get something in the afternoon. The question is then, what do we do with that? You know, to really understand insights. And that's where leadership literally has to have a set of practices where they do things a little bit differently. It means that the head of one of the organizations, at least at the C level or above, goes to lunch and sits down with people in the cafeteria, not in the corporate lunchroom, and be able to actually say, hey, we did a survey this morning. I want to know a little bit more about what you're thinking about this. This is the results that came back. But tell me a story about this. Help me better understand what we should be doing about that. What are the insights that come from that? And then the leadership is demonstrating that they're at least putting their first step forward. Now, if they take that and actually perform something or execute on something in relation to that, now it's cyclical and now we're in a positive cycle. It's when those surveys get done and nothing happens that they become meaningless. And then the technology gets blamed. It's the survey. Well, it's not the survey. It's how we react to information to not only build insights, but also make commitments to doing something forward.
Oh, okay, so just quickly, Franklin Templeton, does the ubiquitous employee sentiment survey on an annual basis, but we've implemented a brand new tool. It's a crowdsourcing tool, and we want employees to submit thoughts, ideas, suggestions, frustrations, and those are being monitored. That's being monitored on a regular basis, and management has allocated funds for up to a dozen projects a year to come out of the thoughts, the ideas, the complaints, the feedback. So management is committed to financially acting on those results. And it's just a novel way to be allowing employees to submit feedback and thoughts and ideas.
Thank you. I just want to briefly respond to what Jerry said as well. One, we've changed surveys to more mini conversations. So instead of once in 3 months, once in 6 months, really long survey that you're procrastinating until your manager is really forcing you to do it, convert it to more mini conversations. Think like 3 or 5 questions delivered in a conversational manner that you can respond to. So that's point one. Second, to Jerry's point, the moment we read that here are 5 top performers who are even facing this kind of issue, the functional leaders were directed to go on walks with those people through the rest of the day. So it wasn't like, oh, next one-on-one. No, stop, go for a walk. And the third thing is, as you come up with an action plan, tell your employees, here is the action plan, and then continue to follow up on, hey, is it actually making a difference or not? Because not closing the loop, which was part of the point what Jerry was saying, is one of the reasons that we've seen people disengage and say, hey, does it even matter? Should I even respond to something like that?
Thank you. So you talked about feedback, and Facebook has been doing a lot on their platform to promote their diversity platform. But just in the past 2 weeks, their African American employees have published very candid stories about how they're being treated in parallel to what they're saying about diversity. And so when you think about Mark Zuckerberg, I don't need to say his last name, Mark, Cheryl, and Maxine, who was their diversity officer, in addition to formal surveys, when you have a set of employees who are not hiding behind anonymity saying, great that this commercial is out there, but here's our real experience, does that hold, or should it hold, their C-suite to a higher level of accountability to say, this might be what we're saying we want everybody to experience, but we have a group of employees who are being very vocal about being excluded from what they say they're trying to create. What accountability should they have within their organization, but then publicly and globally when you have people who are being very vocal about the experiences that they're having?
I think they should have full accountability. Yeah. So the reality is that some companies are a lot more visible. In this room, there's a load of companies with very, very high visibility, and so there's a lot of attention anytime anything actually happens. The speed with which something that would relate to Google or Microsoft or Facebook, as just 3 examples, is even faster, right? But by the same token, the standards ought to be there for them to be able to address that almost instantaneously in an open, transparent way. And we have yet to learn full transparency, what full transparency means. Yeah, I think we're still years away from being able to be comfortable in sharing income, right? And compensation. Only 27% of the companies in the United States have actually done the calculation on gender parity. That sucks. That's a lot of people here in this room whose companies do not know on purpose whether or not they are paying women less than men. On purpose. And why? Because if in fact you do the calculation, it's discoverable. Well, yeah, it is discoverable, so do something about it, fix it. Why would somebody say, so the calculations right now from Harvard, from World Economic Forum, from others, range from 70 years to 200 years before gender parity exists. I don't know about you, but I'm going to be sad when all of you are gone and they finally get to that, you know, because you won't have seen it. I mean, this is dumb. So more and more what I hear people saying, whether it be closed doors or whatever, is I'm tired of waiting. And fundamentally, if you're not saying that out loud in your company and your company's not doing the calculation, then you are part of the problem too. In my opinion, we have a responsibility to step up and take risks. And you've heard that all day long. Truth to power, a whole bunch of other kinds of stuff. Part of our role should be to lead from wherever position we are in. And that brings risk with it. I understand that. And if you don't do it because you have to put food on the table, you have kids, you have a whole bunch of other things, I get it. Just look in the mirror and know at some point I will step up. But we need to look at those issues, right? It's not just Facebook. Facebook's got to solve their problems. They've got to say, if we've got people in this company that are not being treated well, we need to have a team that fundamentally is capable of listening well, demonstrating that they've listened, and then executing on a plan in a reasonable period of time, not 70 years. And the same thing with gender parity. Every single company in this room should have done the calculation, should have informed their employees what it is, should have demonstrated the efforts that they're making to make those changes, and when they're going to audit it next. I'm finishing my rant, so I'm a little bit left of Bernie, but I don't know if that answers your question, but the reality is I translate what Facebook should be doing to whether I'm handling my, what I need to do to step up as much as I need to step up. Cool. And then we get total silence on all of that.
All right. No, it's a perfect time to end. I want to thank you guys so much. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the amazing takeaways I had. I'm sure from talking to people that you guys have had some amazing takeaways today. The biggest thing I would say that besides just adding on to what Jerry said is I think that what it boils down to, if we are ever going to make diversity and inclusion really work and be real in companies, it needs to start at the very top, and we have to live it, not just say it, not just check a box. And until we're all doing that, with Jerry's little bit of risk-taking, because that's what it's going to take for all of us to do with each other in our organizations, if we don't do it, how can we ask other people to do it? So that's my challenge, I guess, to you today, is to go back and take some of those calculated risks. Thanks so much for being here, you guys.
Cool.
We're going to have the live stream videos edited, do some post-production work, clean them up. There should be nice audio, whatever. They'll be posted to the College Recruiter YouTube channel, and youtube.com/College Recruiter, or the link is up on most of the slides also. And that should be in January, possibly sooner. So if everything goes really smoothly, right around the time that the Gophers are winning their January 1st bowl game is potentially, yeah. And anybody who wants to take that bet, no, I'm not going to take that bet. But thank you again to the folks from EY. Very gracious hosts.
Yeah, great.
Also, one thing that I neglected to say early on is that this was not just EY saying, okay, yeah, sure, you can use our room. I think there are like 10 folks or something like that from EY here. Think about the cost of that to this organization. I mean, that was a significant investment. They flew people in from around the country. They saw this topic and the speakers that we had, the panelists here that we had, as being a really important investment in the future of their organization. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool.
For those who are traveling, remember Newark is not JFK.